Well, long time no see. At long last, the moment you've all been waiting for. After so many years and so many delays, the retrospective is finally here. Before I start, I just want to say to all of you who have waited patiently for this, thank you. Thank you so much. This is a project that, honestly, I never thought would come to fruition. This is also the reason why you didn't see any videos last year, and why there was only YouTube shorts and Halloween specials during the 2 years before that. I won't go into detail here as to why it took so long, but ultimately I had to sacrifice making regular videos in order to continue with this and manage stuff on my personal life. But I'm just glad I got this weight off my shoulders, and I'm sure you're glad that you get to finally see what I've been cooking. Now, I know some of you aren't fans of this series and are also worried about any future videos coming after this. Do not worry at all. Regular reviews will resume immediately after this video. So it'll be just like old times again. Now, as for any future retrospectives, you may see some smaller scale retrospectives later this year, like mini retrospectives and whatnot. But for large scale retrospectives like this, yeah, it's gonna take a long time. Otherwise, regular videos will not take nearly as long, not even a year. Anyway, I think I've said enough, and I know you're all excited to see this. So without further ado, I present to you this very special presentation. "2026 marks a very special year for tokusatsu fans, because it is the 55th anniversary of Kamen Rider. That's right folks, the original Kamen Rider series premiered in 1971, exactly 55 years ago. 55 years of a legendary franchise of henshin heroes, defeating the likes of Shocker, Destron, Golgum, the Goronji, Worm, the list goes on and on. This series has had its highs like Kamen Rider Black, Agito, and Fourze, and it had its low points like Kamen Rider Ghost and the American TV series Saban's Masked Rider. But regardless, they henshin and saved the world for over half a century. But you probably knew this already. You all know that I'm one of the biggest fans of tokusatsu, especially Kamen Rider. And I've been open about this since my YouTube channel's inception all the way back in 2007. Over the last 20 years on this YouTube channel, I've covered a number of Kamen Rider video games, including the 4-part retrospective titled Kamen Rider Games. Video games and Kamen Rider have a long history together in Japan, so I thought it was a great idea to cover those. But there were a handful of games I have yet to cover. Several Kamen Rider games that I have mentioned in the past, and fans have wanted to see me cover for a very long time now, but I never got around to reviewing them. Until now. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Kamen Rider Climax, a series of crossover fighting games featuring a large roster of Kamen Riders from almost the entire franchise, from Showa to Heisei. After releasing a few decent standalone Kamen Rider fighting games on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2, Bandai Namco would team up with Bloody Roar and Tatsunoko vs. Capcom developer Aiding to bring a series of solid fighting games, getting updated every single year. So for this retrospective, we're going to see how well these games hold up. This is Kamen Rider Climax, a retrospective. We begin with where it all started. Kamen Rider Climax Heroes for the PlayStation 2, released in 2009. The early Kamen Rider fighting games were mostly decent, but Climax Heroes has much better gameplay mechanics than its predecessors, though I wouldn't exactly call this game amazing or spectacular. It certainly feels faster, and of course the controls are very simple and easy to get into. The combos feel rock solid as well, but it's nothing too deep and you really don't need these to do special attacks. And hey, it's the very first crossover Rider game since the SD Kamen Rider games back in the day, so that makes this game special. Anyway, let's get to the basics on how to play. On the face buttons, you have square to do a weak attack, triangle to do a strong attack, circle to do a weapon attack or special attack, and X or cross to summon a striker. You can do different attacks by holding one of the direction on the D-pad or by doing some kind of combo with square, triangle, or circle and one of the direction on the D-pad. Pressing L1 or R1 will allow you to dodge left or right. Your health bar is similar to the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games as you have 3 different colored health bars, green, yellow, and red. Pretty self-explanatory there, I don't really need to go into detail on that one. Now about strikers, you see the meter on the bottom? You need at least 1 or 2 bars full to summon a striker with the cross button. Once you have enough, you can press X and the background will change to a pink warp screen while something is helping you, be it Ryuki's Drag Redder, Kiva's Castle Doran, Deno's Den Lighter, or even one of Decade's many attack ride cards. This meter isn't just for summoning strikers though. If your meter is full with all 4 bars, you can change into your alternate form or perform a finisher. To change form, press the L2 button. This will allow you to fight in that form while your meter gradually goes down. And while you're in this form, you can repeatedly spam striker summoning by pressing the X button until your meter fully depletes. Finally, to do a finisher, get next to your opponent and make sure they're not blocking, then press R2 and your rider will attack your opponent and fade to white. And this is where you see a beautiful finishing sequence. And every rider looks so damn cool and badass while they perform their finishers. Sadly though, you can't perform finishers while in your alternate form after pressing L2. So yeah, it's gotta be either or. It sucks, but it is what it is. Your rider's alternate form may depend on the rider you selected and the form you select for your rider. Which brings me to the next part, the roster. By default, you can play as all 10 primary Heisei Kamen Riders, from Kuga to Decade. But there are also 4 additional riders to unlock, giving you a grand total of 14 riders. The riders can be easily unlocked with a cheat code in the options mode, and you can find these cheat codes on GameFAQs.com. The unlockable riders are Kamen Rider Zeronos from Deno, Kamen Rider Igza from Kiva, Kamen Rider Dien from Decade, and Kamen Rider Dark Decade, an exclusive character for the game. Now, keep in mind that Dark Decade is pretty much exactly the same as Decade in terms of his moveset. He just simply has a different color, although his complete form when you do a finisher looks exactly the same as Decade's. Funny that. Speaking of Decade, when you play Climax Heroes for the first time, you notice that unlike the other riders, you can't perform certain attacks, use your alternate form, or even perform a finisher. That's because Decade doesn't have most of his cards by default, and you can't unlock them using a cheat code like I showed you earlier. So how do you unlock Decade's other rider forms, attack ride cards, and his complete form? Well, this brings us to the game's story mode, Decade Mode. In Decade Mode, you play as, of course, Kamen Rider Decade, or Tsukasa Kadoya. Your goal is to stop the Rider Worlds from a catastrophic merger, and as you progress throughout the story and defeat all 9 Heisei Riders, you collect all the Kamen Ride cards, the Attack Ride cards, and the Final Form Ride cards. There are 3 levels, each with a number of stages as well as different paths to choose from, but you can always go back and complete another path to 100% complete the entire game. Each stage, or block, is a mission. For the majority of the game, they're standard versus fights, but sometimes you may have to defeat your opponent if you meet a certain criteria. For example, beat your opponent by summoning a striker, or beat your opponent before the timer runs out. And sometimes you have to beat a mission with only the red health bar. And in some missions, you have to fight the same rider in his different forms 3 times, and your health bar does not recover at all. The stages / missions can be somewhat repetitive for the most part. I mean, you're gonna be fighting the same riders over and over again, but overall, Decade Mode is enjoyable. In addition to the cards and forms you unlock, you can also unlock the 3 hidden secondary riders if you prefer not using a cheat code, although you still have to use a cheat code to unlock Dark Decade. There are also some non-playable riders in the game: Kamen Rider Ryuga, Kamen Rider Gatak, and Kamen Rider Kabuto. Funnily enough, there is one stage in Decade mode where you actually do play as Gatak, but this is the only time you can play as him. Not only that, Gatak's moveset is very generic and he doesn't even have a clock up mode or a finisher. What's up with that? And of course, you can also unlock images and videos for the gallery mode, but I'm not going to go into detail on that one. The other modes in this game are Battle Mode, Survival Mode, and Training Mode. Battle Mode is this game's arcade mode if you're playing single player, while in multiplayer it's the Versus mode. In single player battle mode, you fight against 12 of the 14 playable riders in the game, but you never fight Dark Decade mode in this game, and the riders are in random order every time you play this mode. Battle mode is good old arcade fighting action with a bunch of Kamen Riders, and it's great, and you can even be fun in hard and very hard difficulty. Survival mode is also random Kamen Rider fights, but of course, it's endless until all your health bars have been depleted. You beat as many Kamen Riders as possible. Think you're up for the challenge? And of course, training mode is where you practice. I really don't think I need to say anything else. The graphics are fine, but nothing special. Keep in mind that this is a very late PS2 title from 2009, but it's also a budget title. And considering that this is based on a tokusatsu franchise, meaning a show with low budget and mostly cheesy special effects, I say this game looks pretty realistic. All the riders in this game look pretty much exactly like they do in the shows and movies, so I really can't complain here. The music is that cheesy but energetic Japanese dance music, which fits perfectly for the game. I personally love the soundtrack, but your mileage may vary. Some of you watching might be turned off by it. Like many other games, Kamen Rider Climax Heroes has its shortcomings. Like, there's issues with the game's CPU. Sometimes it can feel too easy, while other times it can feel too hard. And sometimes the CPU will be really cheap against you, and you can also be really cheap right back at them. Speaking of cheap, some of the riders and the weapons can easily defeat opponents just by going pew 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 pew, Dien being the most infamous example of this. And it's worse if he's the CPU while summoning Kamen Rider Oja as his striker, which is also his L2 alternate form. And finally, there's the infamous Fourze Axle mode and Kabuto clock up mode, where if they're your opponent, they'll slow down and you can't move at all. This is their L2 alternate modes. And let me tell you something. If you're playing this game with a friend and you use Fourze or Kabuto and you do this, you are the absolute worst. You are just straight up evil if you torture people like that. Do you know how cheap this is? On the flip side though, if I were playing as Fourze or Kabuto, I wouldn't mind doing it to you. I'm kidding. I wouldn't do something so horribly cruel. Some of the riders' forms are missing in this game. For example, there's Fourze's Axle form, but not his Blaster form. There's also Hibiki's Kurenai form, but his arm form is not in the game. Kabuto's Hyper form is nowhere to be found, and Deno's Liner form is in the game, but not his Climax form. And lastly, this game feels somewhat bare bones. You don't have a lot of modes to choose from, which is kind of pathetic for a PS2 title released this late. Fortunately, most of these issues are addressed in subsequent releases, more on that later. All in all, Kamen Rider Climax Heroes is a flawed but fun and enjoyable fighter. If you're a gamer and a fan of Kamen Rider and tokusatsu in general, you're definitely gonna enjoy this game even if it has some shortcomings. There is a bit of a language barrier if you don't know Japanese, but most of the game is pretty self-explanatory. Moving on to the next game, it's Kamen Rider Climax Heroes W for the Wii, also released in 2009. There's really not much to say about this installment in the Climax Heroes series, as this is basically a straight port with a few changes. As you can see here, I'm playing the same matches I recorded from the original PS2 Climax Heroes. Graphically, it looks almost exactly the same as the original. From the naked eye, you really can't tell a huge difference here. The Wii was not a graphical powerhouse even during its heyday, but it was a much more capable system than the PS2. In all fairness though, this game came out only a little over 4 months after Climax Heroes on the PS2, so the developers likely didn't have much time to make significant tweaks. However, as you will see with the later installments, you won't see many huge improvements. With all that being said, there are significant changes here in Climax Heroes W. Let's start off with the quality of life improvements. First is the obvious, the 16:9 widescreen aspect ratio. You get a much better view of the fights this time around. This is enabled by default if your Wii settings are set to 16:9, and you also have the option to play it in 4:3 like the PS2 Climax Heroes game. Load times are much faster here. You may not notice this at first, but when I played matches, I definitely noticed this in between rounds. Now that's seamless. They also changed the lights that indicate how many rounds you and your opponent have won. In the original, they were on the timer circle. Now they're green dots below your health bar. The gameplay and controls are exactly the same as the original PS2 Climax Heroes. Just take the buttons you press on the DualShock 2 and replace them with the buttons on the Wii Classic Controller or Classic Controller Pro. Controls are pretty much one-to-one. However, this version also allows you to play with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. I personally don't recommend this if you're used to the PS2 controls, so I won't get to how to play with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. But there is a nice little gimmick that comes from the Wiimote when playing this game. More on that later. Now onto the roster. All 14 riders from the predecessor are here as well, and that includes Zeronos, Igza, The End, and even Dark Decade. Of course, not all of them are available by default as you have to unlock them. But then you see this guy in the middle right below the random icon. Who is he, you ask? Why, that's Kamen Rider Double, the newest character in Climax Heroes W and the then current rider from the titular then current Kamen Rider series. Fundamentally, Double plays the same as the other riders in the game. However, his ZL alternate forms and B button striker attacks are very cleverly done with him here. Unfortunately, you can only choose between two of Philip's Gaia memories, Heat and Lunar, but for Shotaro's Gaia memories, there are 3 of them and can be changed at any time during the match: Metal, Trigger, and the default Joker. And of course, Philip's default Gaia memory is the Cyclone. Double not having many of his forms available in this game made a lot of sense at the time. I think Kamen Rider Double was only about 10 to 15 episodes in when this game came out, so we had yet to see what Philip and Shotaro were truly capable of. There are more characters to play as, but I'll get to them a bit later on. So now that I've talked about Kamen Rider Double as a playable character, I think now would be the time to talk about the little feature on the Wii mode in this game. Every time you change into your alternate form or summon a striker, you'll hear a sound cue from the Wii mode speaker. And that was really awesome to hear back then. Here, have a listen.
Start up. 3, 2, 1. Time out. Evolution King. Kenshin! Kamen Rider Akito.
Pretty cool, huh? Since this installment is now centered around Kamen Rider Double, the game's single-player story mode, known as Climax Mode, now revolves around Kamen Rider Double instead of Decade. Climax Mode is similar to Decade Mode in that the missions are rather simple to beat, but the layout of this mode is very different. Instead of a map that gives you different paths, this mode is linear and shorter. See, this only has 7 stages, though the stages have a certain number of missions depending on the stage. All of them can be completed in less than an hour. Now you're probably thinking, well, what about the other riders? Can you play as them in Climax Mode? Why, yes of course. The thing is, All of the other Kamen Riders, including Decade, only have one stage with multiple missions, as opposed to the 7 that Double has. And since there are 14 riders from the original Climax Heroes, that makes 19 stages in grand total. It might not sound so bad, but compared to the original Climax Heroes, this feels like multiple short games instead of a single long game. Fortunately though, Climax Mode isn't the only single player story mode here. If you play as Double and beat all 7 stages without using a continue, you unlock a new mode called Hell Mode. In Hell Mode, the layout is pretty much the same as Double in Climax Mode, except there are only 5 stages instead of 7. Also, you don't select a Kamen Rider before starting this mode. In every stage, you have to play as the character you're given in each stage. Not bad, but the thing is, a lot of these characters are the NPCs that you fight against. And that includes the Magma Dopant, the T-Rex Dopant, Gel Newt, and even evil Kamen Riders like Ryuga, Dark Kabuto, and Negadeno. And another problem with these characters is that they can't charge their meters and they don't even have their own ZR finishers. ZL also doesn't do anything. So basically these characters who are usually NPCs have the most basic and generic moveset you can possibly think of. Well, at least some of them have ZL abilities, the button where you usually activate the rider's alternate form. This is used for clock up when you play as Gattack, Dark Kabuto, Punch Hopper, and Kick Hopper. In the original Climax Heroes, Gattack couldn't even do clock up, so this is actually an upgrade, albeit a small one. By the way, you can also play as the NPC riders and monsters in battle mode. You're probably asking, how do you even do that when they're not even seen on the character select screen? Well, it turns out that they're actually hidden, like really hidden. And to do this, you have to highlight a specific Kamen Rider, hold the plus button, and select them with A. To play as Gattack, do this with Kuga. For G3X, do this with Agito. For Ryuga, do this with Ryuki. For Autovagen, do this with Blade. For Dark Kabuto, do this with Kabuto. For Negadeno, do this with Deno. For Punch Hopper, do this with Igzop. For the Worm Monster, do this with Hibiki. For T-Rex Dopant, do this with Dark Decade. For Gel Newt, do this with Kiva. For Magma Dopant, do this with Yen. I think you get the gist of things now. But like I said, they don't have ZL moves save for the 4 riders from Kabuto, ZR finishers, the B button does nothing, and they can't charge their meters. Their movesets are very basic, so you might find them really boring to play as. Oh, and by the way, you can't do the highlight, hold plus, and selecting to play these characters by default. Of course, you have to beat Climax Mode and Hell Mode to unlock them, as well as the secondary riders and Dark Mode on the selection screen. In the original Climax Heroes, Decade's complete form can be unlocked by beating Decade Mode. However, since Climax Mode is centered around Double, you have to unlock this form in a different way, and the only way to do that is by entering a code. To unlock Decade's complete form, in the Battle Mode select screen, you have to press, not hold, the plus button on the following riders in this exact order: Kuga, Agito, Ryuki, Fourze, Blade, Hibiki, Kabuto, Deno, and Kiva, and it goes like this.
Kuga, Agito, Ryuki, Fourze, Blade, Hibiki, Kabuto, Deno, Kiva. ファイナル仮面ライド DK.
The biggest disappointment I have with Climax Heroes W compared to its predecessor is that Battle Mode in single player mode is no longer an arcade mode where you fight against 13 other riders. Instead, it's the same 2-player Battle Mode, except of course you're going up against the CPU. Making Battle Mode a versus mode against the CPU in single player is fine, but it shouldn't be done at the expense of the way Battle Mode used to be in the original Climax Heroes. So once you're done with Climax Mode and Hell Mode, you will unlock all the characters, there's a good chance you might not play this game again for this reason alone. But of course there's also Survival Mode and Training Mode like in the original game. I've already covered that part in the last game, so I don't need to repeat myself. One cool aspect I like about this game is how creative the game's menu is. You might see Kamen Rider Double in his default Cyclone Joker form, and then you might see him in his Heat Metal form, and then his Luna Trigger form. And after you unlock Hell mode, you might even see Punch Hopper and Kick Hopper in the main menu. And when this happens, you hear them talking when you highlight a mode to select instead of the other characters. And that's pretty much it for Kamen Rider Climax Heroes W for the Wii. All in all, if you played the original before this, I can't really recommend this unless you're a collector or a hardcore fan. With it being mostly the same apart from a handful of new characters and a somewhat different single player mode, and battle mode getting rid of the arcade mode for single player, you're better off sticking with the last game. And if you really want to play as Kamen Rider Double and the other riders that were added into this game, I recommend playing the later installments, which of course I will cover in this retrospective. But first, it's time to take a look at a Kamen Rider game in the good old US of A. In 2009, Atlus Entertainment introduced Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, an adaptation of Kamen Rider Ryuki in a similar vein as Power Rangers with Super Sentai, but with a somewhat darker tone. It aired on the CW network on Saturday mornings here in the United States under the CW4Kids block, which was owned by 4Kids Entertainment at the time. The same folks responsible for the Pokemon dub, the Yu-Gi-Oh dub, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, despite winning a Daytime Emmy Award, the show was a commercial failure in both ratings and toy sales, and we never saw a Kamen Rider adaptation ever again. But funnily enough, despite the commercial failure of Dragon Knight, we ended up getting a video game. 2 in fact. Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Wii and for Nintendo DS. Now I would like to cover both, but I'm only going to cover the Wii version for this retrospective for a very good reason. Check out these clips from the 2009 trailer. Look familiar? Yeah, I thought so.
Kamen Rider Dragon Knight!
And so, we come to the next part in this retrospective. Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Wii. Like with Climax Heroes and Climax Heroes W, this game also released in 2009, and it actually came out just mere weeks before Climax Heroes W got released in Japan. Yeah, it came out before Climax Heroes W, but I'm reviewing this after Climax Heroes W. Why did I do that? Well, this one kind of ties with the next installment. More on that later. So let's start off with another graphics comparison. I can only use Ryuki / Dragon Knight here, since he's the only character in the Dragon Knight game that's also in Climax Heroes. Well, it's not actually the same character, but if you understand how toku adaptations work, you get my point, but I digress. Graphically, it looks more or less the same as the 2 Climax Heroes games. Perhaps Dragon Knight has slightly better shadows and lighting, but not much else can be said here. And even if I show footage of 2 characters that were never present in Climax Heroes before this, you could tell right away that it looks almost exactly the same as Climax Heroes, just with a brand new HUD and maybe slightly different camera angle. I mean, the stages and music are literally taken from Climax Heroes. Speaking of the HUD, you no longer have the 3 colored health bars like in Climax Heroes. Now it's a single colored health bar, which means the fights are a lot shorter. This kind of foreshadows the 2 final Climax Heroes games, but more on that later. In terms of gameplay, it's essentially the same as Climax Heroes, but it makes some noteworthy changes to reflect on the show and what the riders do. Now you use weapons, special attacks, and finishers by selecting an advent card on your advent deck instead of pressing certain buttons. You can select the card you want by moving left or right on the right stick and pressing A on the classic controller. However, depending on how many bars you have filled in your meter, you can't use certain cards until you have enough bars. A card like Sword Vent would require like 1 or 2 bars, but a card like Shoot Vent or Unite Vent may require 4 bars. In the case of the Final Vent card, which is your finisher, you need to have all of your bars full to perform the Final Vent. By the way, the Final Vent sequences look awesome, just as awesome as the Climax Heroes finishers. Now, I'm really digging the updated system here, but I have some major complaints. First off, if you're used to charging your meter in Climax Heroes, well, as Wade Barrett would say, I'm afraid I've got some bad news. You can't charge your bars. As in, you can't press and hold down to charge. Yeah, the only way to fill up your bars is by either attacking or getting hit. So if you want to use the final vent card just as your opponent's health is low, you need to make sure you don't waste bars on your other advent cards. Fortunately, there is sort of a workaround for this. See, what I do is, if my opponent's health is low and I don't have any of my bars full, I just jump up and do weak punches so that my rider keeps punching in the air. Really, this is the closest this game will ever get to charging. Another complaint I have is the fact that you can only use your cards once and only once per round. Yeah, I get it. That's how playing cards are supposed to work. But it's so annoying when your opponent punches or kicks you just as you're about to use your card. Some cards are instant, like with Sword Vent, but when using another card, you have to see your rider insert the card into their weapon. That's not good at all when your opponent can easily attack you before it happens, effectively canceling the advent card. Performing final vents can be especially frustrating at times. See, your opponent has to be in picture perfect position and make sure he or she does not punch, kick, or sidestep. Because if something goes wrong, oops, there goes your final vent card. This is because when you press A to do the final vent, you see a brief animation sequence of the rider getting ready to do his or her finisher. The only card you can use multiple times in a single round is Advent, or Attack Vent as it is called in the Dragon Knight show. This requires 3 bars. You do this by pressing the X button on the classic controller. This is Dragon Knight's equivalent of summoning a striker in Climax Heroes. You know, the one used for stuff like Den-O's Denliner or Kiva's Castle Doran, although this was originally mapped to the B button in Climax Heroes W. Aside from the new card-based system, another notable gameplay change is when you dodge or avoid attacks with the L and R buttons. In Climax Heroes and Climax Heroes W, your character would roll out of the way. In Dragon Knight, that has been changed to a sidestep. Honestly, I prefer the roll. It made dodging attacks easier for me. Changing it to a sidestep made me use it a lot less. Though I guess the developers thought the roll made dodging too easy? Like with Climax Heroes W, you also have the option to play with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck. However, they didn't include any sound effects from the Wiimote this time around. That's a shame. But regardless, I don't think it's ideal to use the Wiimote and Nunchuck in a traditional fighting game. This game has a grand total of 15 Kamen Riders of Antara to choose from, which is roughly the same amount of riders as the original PS2 game. And by the way, I'm going to refer to the riders here as their American names, since this is based on an American Kamen Rider series. So no Ryuki, Oja, Odin, etc. Anyway, you have Dragon Knight, Wing Knight, Torque, Incisor, Camo, Siren, Sting, Thrust, Brother Spear and Axe, Strike, Wrath, Onyx, Survive Mode Dragon Knight, and Survive Mode Wing Knight. Yeah, for some reason they decided to make the Survive Mode versions of Dragon Knight and Wing Knight separate characters from their normal forms. A little weird, but it is what it is. And after you select your rider, you can select which cards you want to use on your Advent deck. You can select up to 5 cards. Kamen Rider Strike is unique from the other riders as he has 3 Final Vent cards, which gives him 3 Advent monsters. Obviously, if you followed the series, you know that he stole 2 of them from Sting and Thrust. But what's also unique about him is that he has the Unite Vent card, which combines all 3 Advent monsters to become Genocider. And with Genocider, he does an awesome Final Vent after using Unite Vent. But remember when I said earlier about not being able to charge your meter and having to only use your cards once per round? Yeah, if you want to use both the Unite Vent and Final Vent, it's gonna be annoying to do. There is one NPC in this game, and that is, of course, the final boss in this game and the show's main villain, General Xaviax. But really, in terms of his moveset, all Xaviax does is copy other riders. Like he might have Dragon Knight's Advent deck when you play Arcade Mode once, then when you play it again, he'll have Wrath's or Camo's Advent deck. That being said, Xaviax does have one unique move to him, and that is his Final Vent. And I gotta say, his Final Vent looks freaking awesome. It's such a shame you can't play as him just to do this move. Oh yeah, and did I mention that Kamen Rider Torque is just like the end in Climax Heroes, where he can easily defeat his opponent by going pew 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 pew? Yeah, you can just be cheap if you don't want to fight or use any of your cards. Now with all that being said, you don't have all of your riders out of the gate, nor do you have all of your cards out of the gate. So not only do you have to unlock the riders, but also all of their advent cards. How do you do that? Well, the riders can be unlocked via arcade and 1P play, Sans Survive Mode Dragon Knight and Survive Mode Wing Knight. But the advent cards have to be unlocked in the game's story mode called Mirror World. Now here's where things get interesting. Mirror World kind of works like a board game but without turns. You can't freely move around the map by pressing a direction on the D-pad like in a Mario game or something. Instead, you have to select the block that you want to move to next. The majority of blocks have a versus mark on them. These are your missions. A lot of them are one-on-one fights with other riders, some of which you have to complete by meeting a certain criteria. For example, defeat your opponent with a final vent, defeat your opponent without using your cards, and use attack vent twice. And in some missions, you might see an opponent with guard vent always enabled or receive a boost in health or defense. These missions are similar to the ones in the Climax Heroes games. But there are also other missions where the game turned into a third-person beat-em-up. Oh, finally, something different from the typical for once. But even though this is a cool new feature, these missions are also very repetitive. In almost every single one of them, you fight nothing but an army of Gel Newts and Ray Dragoons. And to top it all off, all of the locations look exactly the same. It's like I'm playing the same exact missions over and over and over and over again. The final block in Mirror World is the only time a beat 'em up mission is somewhat different, because you fight General Zodiacs at the very end, unless you're playing as Kamen Rider Wrath. He fights exactly the same as he does in arcade mode. I already talked about him, so I don't need to mention him again. But if you want to 100% complete the game and get all the advent cards as well as both survive mode riders, you have to keep playing Mirror World multiple times. Not only to unlock the cards, but also to build up as much rider points as possible so that you have enough of them to purchase all the cards. Yeah, you have to unlock the cards and buy them with in-game currency. Oh jeez, why did the developers make it a grind to unlock everything? I hate it when they do that. That's just so annoying. It's especially annoying because you have to keep playing those repetitive beat 'em up missions over and over again. Like, come on. I really wish they'd at least have those beat 'em up missions somewhat unique. Like have other riders to fight as well as the Gel Newts and Ray Dragoons. How about be able to break open certain items and collect a card or something? You know, like in the other 3D beat 'em ups. Or how about adding other monsters from Dragon Knight or Ryuki? There's many things they can do with these third-person beat 'em up segments. Also, the frame rate drops significantly when there's too many monsters on screen at once. The majority of the game runs at 60 frames per second, but not during these moments. This is most likely due to the hardware limitations of the Wii. The game doesn't have much to offer in terms of modes. It doesn't even have a survival mode or gallery mode like in the Climax Heroes games. That's a real shame because survival mode is basically an endless mode if you're really good at not getting hit by your opponent. No gallery mode is also disappointing because you can't check out pictures, videos, or even listen to some music. Difficulty levels have also been cut down. Instead of very easy, normal, hard, and very hard, it's just easy, normal, and hard. First of all, difficulty range is objectively better than this. Second of all, I don't think the CPU in these difficulties seem quite right. If anything, it feels more like very easy, and hard, or very hard. Normal feels too easy, while hard feels too hard. Climax Heroes had issues with the AI as well, but here, it's a lot more apparent. Then again, even on the hardest difficulty, I can use torque and simply go pew 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 and I easily beat the game. The game's menu screen looks pretty boring and lackluster. Compared to Climax Heroes and Climax Heroes W, this one looks like a downgrade. It makes me miss seeing Punch Hopper and Kick Hopper talk on the menu screen. Speaking of lackluster, take a look at this!
Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight. Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight. Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight.
Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight.
Really? That's it? No proper intro video? Just a random Kamen Rider shouting, Kamen Rider, Dragon Knight! Oh, come on, talk about lazy. Speaking of lazy, they didn't even package the game with a proper instruction manual. Kamen Rider video games in America are a rare breed, so whoever did this should have treated it much better. Although, in all fairness, this is better than most physical games today, where they don't come with any instruction manual at all. It's really sad that the bar has gotten so low now that a Dragon Knight game with a pathetic instruction manual is better. Being that this is a game based on an American adaptation of a Kamen Rider series, obviously they had to get English-speaking voice actors. However, these are not the same actors from the show. They actually got different voice actors to portray the characters. But the casting here is quite interesting. It features the voice of Johnny Young Bosch as Dragon Knight / Onyx. Yeah, imagine that. A Power Rangers actor portraying a Kamen Rider. We've come full circle, people. It also features some well-known voice actors like Laura Bailey, Kyle Hebert, Liam O'Brien, and Vic Mignogna. Some of the characters' lines are really repetitive, like Camo and Zodiacs constantly shouting, "Impossible!" or Strike constantly reminding me that I will stop here. I know I've had my criticism about this game, but putting them aside, I enjoyed Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Wii. All in all, it's a decent fighting game that only the most hardcore of Kamen Rider fans should play. If you don't want to deal with the language barrier in Climax Heroes, of course. Otherwise, I would highly recommend playing the Climax Heroes series over this. I remember buying this game for $30 at GameStop back in 2009. The price wasn't too bad for the time, though I kinda wish it was around $20 after playing it. The Kamen Rider Dragon Knight series aired in Japan as well, however they would never get the game, neither on the Wii or Nintendo DS. Fortunately, Japanese Kamen Rider video game fans would get the next best thing. Oh hell yeah, now we're talking! Now we've come to the 4th installment, when Kamen Rider Climax Heroes started to get really good, and I mean really good. This is Kamen Rider Climax Heroes O's, released in 2010. And for the first time ever, a Climax Heroes game goes multi-platform, as Climax Heroes O's was released for the Wii and PSP, aka PlayStation Portable. For the next 3 parts, I'll cover only the Wii version. I'll briefly cover the PSP versions later on in this retrospective. This is the first Climax Heroes game to see noticeable graphical improvements. Now the graphics are nothing amazing, but the improvement is still there. There's better lighting, better shading, and overall, it's just visually better than all of its predecessors. However, I also think the game overcorrected the visuals in some parts, particularly with Kamen Rider Odin. Comparing him to Wrath in the Dragon Knight game, his color looks a little too bright here. Honestly, I thought Wrath and Dragon Knight looked better. But the main and most notable change in Climax Heroes O's is the gameplay. The gameplay has been completely overhauled and is a big improvement over all of its predecessors. This game is built upon the Dragon Knight game instead of the first 2 Climax Heroes games, but it plays so much better. Before I go over the controls, I should point out that the Wii version gives you the option to play using either the Wiimote and Nunchuck or the classic controller, but I'm only going to use the classic controller since it's recommended for a fighting game, as well as the fact that it's one-to-one to the PSP version controls. Similar to the other Climax Heroes games, Y or square is your normal or weak attack, and B or cross is your strong attack. A or circle can be used as your weapon or special attack, but it can also be used for other things, like using an admin card if you're playing as one of the Ryuki Riders. Doing a finisher is no longer R2 or ZR, or A as it was in the Dragon Knight game. Instead, it is now the X or triangle button. And much like the Dragon Knight game, when you press your finisher, the camera zooms up close to the rider before punching to do his or her finisher. But there's a cool new feature in relation to the finisher. I'll get to that in a moment. Changing forms or summoning a striker or support attack has been changed as well. Instead of pressing L2 or ZL to change and B or cross to summon a striker, both are now set to the left analog stick. Depending on the rider and the form you select, they'll be able to either change form or summon a striker. Yeah, you have to choose one or the other now. Can't have it both ways anymore. So no more of Agito switching to his Burning form while in his Trinity form, Zerona switching to his Zero form while in his Vega form, or Kiva summoning Capsule Doran while in his Emperor form. Honestly, I find that relieving since they always spam attack me like that. Also, when you change form, instead of your charge meter gradually going down before going back to normal, you are permanently in your alternate form until you move any direction on the left stick. This is another big improvement over Climax Heroes and Climax Heroes W. I can fight in my alternate form for as long as I want to, which is great. The only exceptions to that are Fourze's Axle form, and of course all of the Kabuto Riders. By the way, when clock up mode is activated, you see these falling rocks come down in slow motion, which is a nice little touch they did. They also added the clock up, clock over voice from the show. Same goes for the Ryuki voiceover. Sidestepping has also been carried over from Dragon Knight, but it's more responsive now and I actually like using it here. Or maybe it's more or less the same and I just got better at it. I don't know. All I can say is that you sidestep here instead of rolling to evade attacks like in the previous installments. Combos have also improved, but like I said at the beginning of the retrospective, finishers, special attacks, and alternate forms are very easy to do. Your health bar and charge meters have a fresh coat of paint, but they're pretty much the same as they were in the Climax Heroes games. But now, if you're playing as one of the 13 Ryuki Riders, Blade, Double, if you select form change on the character select screen that is, or O's, their cards, Gaia Memories, or Core Medals are indicated above their charge meter. I'll explain in detail a bit later on. Now about that cool new feature, did you ever find it annoying that you had to step back and charge your meter just to do a finisher while your opponent's health is low in the red color? Well, say no more, because once your opponent's health is low, or your health is low, you get into this awesome new feature called Climax Time. In Climax Time, both you and your opponent's charge meters automatically fill up, and you both have the opportunity to perform a finisher. But wait, it gets better from here. If both you and your opponent keep your charge meters full after that, and you press the finisher button, you get into what is called Final Reflect Chance, and you get into this mini game that looks like a test of strength. And here, you have to quickly mash all 4 face buttons so that your side of the bar dominates your opponent's side before finally performing your finisher. But if your opponent initiates Final Reflect Chance first, you have to press the X or triangle button as quickly as possible. Wow, talk about a big quality of life improvement. Climax Time is an excellent feature in this game, and it makes the experience a lot more fun. It's especially useful if your opponent kicks your ass until your health is low. You can survive a fight by taking advantage of the Final Reflect Chance and performing your finisher, then charge your meter before your opponent gets up and do it again until your opponent is KO'd or has a health bar as low as you do. And best of all, when Climax Time kicks in, the theme song of the rider that is winning the fight starts playing. Yes, they actually got the opening and ending themes of the shows the riders come from, including Full Force from Kamen Rider Kabuto, Justifies from Kamen Rider Fourze, Climax Jump from Kamen Rider Den-O, and even Deep Breath from Kamen Rider Agito. Personally, I prefer if Agito used Believe Yourself, but overall I'm more than happy with this. Technically speaking, they're not their actual themes, but rather remakes of those themes, but I'm more than happy with this. Nonetheless, Climax Time is easily the most welcoming addition to the Climax Heroes series. This game has easily the largest roster of any Kamen Rider game up to this point. You have all of the main Phase 1 Heisei riders, Kamen Rider Double, all 12 secondary Ryuki riders, G3X from Agito, Kaiza and Autovajin from Fourze, Garen from Blade, 4 secondary Kabuto riders, Zeronos and Negadeno from Den-O, Iza from Kiba, Dien from Decade, Axel from Double, and of course the then current Kamen Rider from the titular then current Kamen Rider series, Kamen Rider O's. That's a grand total of 38 characters, 19 by default and 19 more to unlock. 37 riders and Autovajin. This roster is absolutely stacked. But wait, it gets better. Many of the main riders have new alternate forms as well as existing alternate forms and strikers to summon or support attacks. When you select a certain rider, they might have one of the 5 options to choose from depending on the rider. Form change for Kuga, Den-O, and Double, power up for most of the main riders, speed up for all of the Kabuto riders, support attack which is for summoning strikers, and in the case of Double's Fang Joker form, single. Some secondary riders don't have any of these options though, they're probably also single like Fang Joker is. Since the Kamen Rider Double series completed its run by its time, there are more forms for Double, including the aforementioned Fang Joker, and a new secondary rider in Axel, who also has a power-up form in Trial. There's even Cyclone Joker Extreme form for Double, as well as the unlockable Cyclone Axel Extreme. But weirdly enough, Cyclone Axel Extreme is a separate character from Double, kinda like Survive Mode Dragon Knight and Survive Mode Wing Knight in the Dragon Knight game. For the other returning Heisei riders, they gave Kuga his ultimate form, Aito his shining form, Fourze his blaster form, Blade his jack form, Hibiki his arm form, Kabuto his hyper form, and even Deno his super climax form. Seeing these forms even fully playable makes me very happy. And hey, there's even a playable Decade Complete form as well as a playable Zerono Zero form. Remember, these forms weren't playable in the previous installments. Also, DN can now summon a different rider instead of just Oja now. You can now select between Oja, Scissors, Raya, Guy, Fem, and Punch Hopper. All of these are Ryuki riders except Punch Hopper, who is a Kabuto rider. And of course, all of the returning riders' existing alternate forms are here as well. It sucks that there's no playable Agito Burning form though. Kamen Rider Double and O's are peculiar when it comes to their form changes. This is because when using the left analog stick in different directions, they can change into any possible combination. With Double, you can change Philip's Gaia memory by moving the left stick left, Shotaro's Gaia memory by moving it right, and changing both at the same time by moving up on the stick. With O's, moving left changes the right hand core metal, moving up changes the middle core metal, and moving right changes the left hand core metal. This can take some getting used to. I remember this feeling really awkward the first time I did this, and you have to learn to do it quickly since you're in the middle of a fight. For the first time in Climax Heroes, thanks to the option of changing their forms in the character select screen, riders now have multiple finishers, and their finishers look awesome as hell. Even better than their finishers in the previous games. That being said, many of the returning riders' old finishers have also been carried over to Climax Heroes O's. So even though this game has greatly improved in many aspects, the developers still ended up recycling assets from the previous games. Speaking of recycling assets, ever wonder why all 13 Ryuki riders are in this game, while all the others get a handful of secondary riders? Well, really, it's because they're straight up recycled from the Kamen Rider Dragon Knight Wii game. Since that game already uses the Climax Heroes engine, it makes sense from a business standpoint to reuse assets for the next annual game. I mean, this game already rehashes a lot of stuff from the original Climax Heroes on the freaking PS2. And for those of you who are familiar with Dragon Knight but not Ryuki, all 13 of those riders use their original Ryuki names instead of their Dragon Knight names. So no Incisor, Torque, Strike, Wrath, or any localized name like those. There is one other notable change. In the Dragon Knight game, you can only use your advent cards once per round. Thankfully, in Climax Heroes O's, that has changed. You can now use your advent cards as many times as you want. You can use Sword Vent, Strike Vent, and even Final Vent as many times as you want. Just make sure that you have enough bars filled up on your charge meter to use them. Also, yes, if you've only played the Dragon Knight Wii game, you can actually charge here, like Climax Heroes. Also, Kamen Rider Oja's cards have been cut down. He only uses the Genocider Advent monster and only has that one Final Vent with Genocider. So he doesn't use Unite Vent, his normal Final Vent with Venosnaker, or the Final Vent and Advent monster cards he stole from Raya and Guy. I guess they had to cut those down to make room for more riders. Confined Vent, Return Vent, and Steel Vent have also been cut out of the game. Thank God! Those cards were really annoying. Lastly, Ryuki and Knight Survive forms are alternate forms you can select for them instead of being separate characters like in the Dragon Knight game. This makes a lot more sense than having them as separate characters. And speaking of their Survive forms, check out their Final Vent finishers compared to the finishers in Dragon Knight. For some reason, they no longer ram their motorcycles onto their opponents. Instead, they just fire projectiles. Do I sense a little censorship? Kabuto and his related riders have clock up once again, but I found it less annoying in this game than in the previous games. Same with Fourze's Axel form. I guess the CPU here doesn't do it as often as in Climax Heroes and Climax Heroes W. Or maybe because I'm more lucky and end up fighting Fourze in his blaster form and Kabuto in his hyper form more often. Some of the unlockable secondary riders in Autovagen have no finishers and no sort of power-up or strikers to summon, so the only thing they can do is their regular moves. I'd be okay with this if this was the first 2 installments, but we are 3 installments in, 4 if you count Dragon Knight. I was expecting everyone to have a finisher, especially G3X, Kaiza, Autovagen, the secondary Kabuto riders, and Negadeno since they were carried over from the previous installments. At least Ryuga has his complete moveset, including his finisher, but Ryuga in this game is a copy and paste of Onyx from Dragon Knight, not Ryuga from the first 2 Climax Heroes games, even though he is very similar. But what's weird is that some of the main riders' other options, like support attack or form change, don't have finishers, but they have finishers in others like power up, like with Kuga after you select form change for example. I don't know why he doesn't have a finisher when selecting this mode, it's very weird. Same with Fourze when you select support attack. The biggest disappointment for me was when I unlocked and play as Cyclone Axel Extreme. It's weird that he doesn't have a finisher, yet double Cyclone Joker Extreme form does. That's a big head scratcher to me because despite this, he is incredibly overpowered. And honestly, I find some of the secondary riders pretty boring to play as. The secondary Kabuto riders and Negadeno are fine, but Autovagen is really boring, Kaiza is also boring, and all Garen does is pew 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 pew. I mean, Zolda and Dien are like that also, but at least they have finishers, special attacks, and other moves. With that being said, Final Reflect Chance does work with the characters that don't have finishers, but it can only be initiated if your opponent has a finisher. But after the button mashing segment, if you win, unfortunately, all your rider does is a very basic move like an uppercut. Yeah, that's pretty lame. In terms of mode, it's similar to the Kamen Rider Dragon Knight game, except it has a gallery mode, which is also featured in the first 2 Climax Heroes games. Battle mode is now gone, and in its place is arcade mode, versus mode, and 2-player mode. Arcade mode is just like in the Dragon Knight game. You fight a handful of riders, but instead of General Xaviax, the final boss is either Kamen Rider Odin, Kamen Rider Ryuga, or Kamen Rider Dark Kabuto. Versus mode and 2P mode are self-explanatory, and of course there's training mode. For some reason they didn't bring back survival mode. That kinda sucks because I like a mode where I keep fighting people until I lose, but it is what it is. But the most notable mode in this game is the main story mode known as Ragnarok mode. If you play the Dragon Knight game on the Wii, this is going to look very familiar. Even though there is a massive language barrier, it's fairly easy to beat, even if you don't know Japanese. Essentially, it's the same as Mirror World, but if you didn't play the Dragon Knight Wii game, then this is all new. You start off by selecting either O's or double. You play as more riders as the game progresses. Ragnarok mode works like a board game. You start off on a map, move one turn, then one of the enemies moves another turn. You keep going until you either get into a certain spot that takes you to a mission, or until you and the moving monster or rider gets in your way, which takes you to another mission or fights. Just like in Dragon Knight's Mirror World, you have either one-on-one fights as missions to complete, or third-person beat-em-up stages, where you have to beat a bunch of enemy grunts. But here, it's somewhat better than it was in the Dragon Knight game. It's still repetitive, but thankfully nowhere near as repetitive as Mirror World. First off, there's a lot more different stages now than just the same old warehouse and industrial stages. Like you have a forest to fight in and many more. More importantly, they've added more monsters as well as riot troopers in this mode. In addition to the Gelnoots and Ray Dragoons, you also fight the Masquerade Dopan, worms, and even more monsters. You also fight some riders in these third-person stages and even team up with a rider sometimes. You can also destroy these purple crystals in some stages. Lastly, some of these third-person stages are less linear. Instead of going straight ahead while killing every single monster on the field, sometimes you have to go from one area to kill monsters, then another area to kill other monsters. They made these stages more Musou-like, or Dynasty Warriors-like if you will. It feels like a prototype of what would become the Kamen Rider Batch Ride War trilogy later on. This mode is pretty long though. There are 14 worlds in grand total. Not only that, if you want to unlock every single rider, you have to go back and complete certain worlds multiple times to unlock some of the riders. Other riders are unlocked by going back and fighting enemies that you missed out if you went on a different path. I'm sorry, but I find this way to unlock characters very tedious. I've done it before when I played it on the Wii back in the day, but I just didn't want to go through that again for this retrospective. So I downloaded a save file of the Wii version to unlock all of the characters right away. With Cyclone Axle Extreme, you have to unlock all of the riders before unlocking him. Is it really worth it though when he doesn't even have a finisher? Also, yes, the frame rate still drops to half when there are too many monsters on screen at once. I guess this is a hardware limitation after all. The CPU still has issues, but it's better than in any of the previous installments. Plus, they changed the difficulty settings back to very easy, easy, normal, hard, and very hard instead of just easy, normal, and hard like in the Dragon Knight game. Getting back to recycling assets, Climax Heroes O's uses the same stages as all of the previous installments, only now they have better visuals and lighting. But what's cool about this game is that some of them have nighttime versions of those stages, namely the Stadium, Forest, and Seashore stages. At least they tried to make the already existing stages a little different. They did add one new stage though. It's known as the Futo stage, and it looks like a street in Tokyo or something. Nonetheless, it's great to see that they finally added a new stage. New songs were also added to the game. As I mentioned earlier, it uses the opening and ending themes from the shows, but it also has new songs for the menu screens, as well as a new stage that was added. All of the existing stages obviously use their old theme songs. But I especially love O's All Fight as the game's intro, which you heard early on. It is sung by the legendary Akira Kushida, who has done many tokusatsu and anime theme songs over the years, and his voice is godlike. The main menu screen with the core medals and the different O's forms looks cool, but it's not as creative as Climax Heroes W, though at least it's an upgrade from the really boring Dragon Knight menu. Anyway, to close out this part of the retrospective, this game has the funniest ending credits to any Kamen Rider game. Check this out. Look familiar? Yeah, it's a parody of Kamen Rider Club for the Famicom. Remember that from part 1 of my Kamen Rider games retrospective? Or better yet, remember when I reviewed it in one of my very early Awful Games episodes? When I saw this the first time I played it, I was laughing my ass off. I'm surprised they actually did this. Like, do the developers know about my YouTube channel? I'm curious. All in all, Kamen Rider Climax Heroes O's is a really fun fighting game, and easily the best Kamen Rider fighting game up to this point. Is it perfect? No, far from it. But there's a lot more to offer and a lot of improvements to make it a solid game. If you can get past the language barrier, definitely play this game over any of its predecessors. Now we come to the second to last installment in the Kamen Rider Climax Heroes series. Kamen Rider Climax Heroes Fourze, released in 2011 also for the Wii and PSP. This game celebrates Kamen Rider's 40th anniversary in a special way. That's right folks, for the first time ever, the OGs of the Kamen Rider franchise, the Showa Riders, make their debut in the Climax Heroes series. Man, I have wanted to play as them since the original Climax Heroes on the PS2, and after 3 installments, they are finally included. I bet Ishinomori-san is looking down from heaven and smiling at this. Kamen Rider 1 and 2, aka Ichigo and Nigo, V3, Amazon, Black-RX, and even Shadow Moon are here. They're awesome, they kick ass, this game gets a 10 out of 10. End of review. Okay, that last part was a joke. Anyway, here's my more serious in-depth review of Kamen Rider Climax Heroes Fourze. I'm still very happy that the Showa Riders were included. That being said, not all of them were included unfortunately. Riderman, Kamen Rider X, Kamen Rider Stronger, Sky Rider, and Kamen Rider Super 1 are not in this game. Neither are Shin, Zeto, and J if you count those as Showa Riders. Well, Riderman is in the game, but he's not a playable character. Instead, he only appears as V3 Striker. Yeah, that's literally Riderman's only appearance, as a Striker. And that's a real shame. I really wish they made him a fully playable character as well. I mean, they made Autovasion a playable character and Striker for Fourze in Climax Heroes O's, so I don't know why they couldn't do the same for Riderman. But hey, this is better than no Showa Riders at all. I'm grateful that these guys were added to the game, and for that I can't complain much. Maybe in the next installment they'll have all of the Showa Riders. But what makes the Showa Riders different from the Heisei Riders in this game? Well, notice their henshin belts above their charge meters? They have a cool feature where, if you have a couple of bars filled up on your meter and press down in A, or down in circle, it will activate that belt and light up. and if you do a certain special attack while it's activated, the narrator will chime in and explain what the move does while the gameplay is in a freeze frame state. This is exactly how the 70s Kamen Rider shows played out. And if you do a finisher while the bell is light up, the narrator will also speak while the game is in a freeze frame. That's a pretty cool feature. Every time I do that, it always makes me smile. Black-RX can change into either Robo-Rider or Bio-Rider, but you have to select one or the other in the character select screen. When it comes to his finisher, it doesn't matter which form you pick because he'll always do his normal finisher. And let me tell you, his finisher in this game is absolutely perfect. Him using the Revolt Clash with his Revolt Cane looks exactly as it did in the Kamen Rider Black-RX series. Simply perfection. Also, every time you activate your belt, you see this film grain effect, you know, because the Showa Riders are old and they're for old people. But it's kind of weird seeing this happen to Black-RX, and Shadow Moon because they're not from the 70s, they're from the 80s, and the late 80s on top of that. And when this game came out, the late 80s wasn't even that old. But anyway, I'm digressing here. To sum up this part, the Showa Riders and Climax Heroes Fourze kick ass, their finishers are awesome, let's move on. Besides the addition of the Showa Riders, there are other noteworthy changes to Climax Heroes Fourze. The first thing you'll notice on this clip is, why the hell are there two Kamen Riders on one side? That's because Climax Heroes Fourze is the first Climax Heroes game to feature tag teams. You can have 1-on-1 matches, 2-on-2 matches, and even 2-on-1 handicap matches. So there's more variety in fights than ever before. Controls for this game are exactly the same as in Climax Heroes O's, but for tag team controls, you use the left analog stick for switching characters and getting help from your partner. Move left or right to switch character, and move up or down to get help from your character for a bit. Do keep in mind that your partner will only help you until your charge meter is fully depleted. You can call your partner with or without a fully charged meter, but the more bars you have on your charge meter, the longer your partner will stick around. And if your charge meter is completely empty, then he or she will just come and go. So I recommend charging up your meter before calling your partner. With tag team controls being mapped to the left analog stick, this means you can't change into your alternate forms or use strikers during a match. You can play as a rider's alternate form, but you have to select the form you want in the character selection screen before starting a game. Now, what do I think of the tag feature? Gonna be honest, it's okay. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a welcoming addition, but I have some major complaints here. First of all, why do both riders share the same health bar? Shouldn't it be two different health bars? So even if the other guy isn't taking any hits, he still loses health all because the guy who was fighting was taking hits? That makes absolutely no sense to me, and quite frankly, I don't think that's fair. Other fighting games with tag battles don't do this. Second of all, even if you call your partner to help, your partner won't do anything unless you press buttons. So your partner will only help you if you try and fight your opponent. Shouldn't my partner be, you know, CPU controlled? And lastly, the tag finishers are pretty lame. Compared to the regular finishers, they're nowhere near as cool or spectacular. No matter which characters you select, they all do the same moves. Double rider kick, double rider punch, and one rider doing a rider kick while the other is doing a rider punch. And they all have the same animations. For certain rider teams like Ichigo and Nigo and Punch Hopper and Kick Hopper, this works perfectly fine for them. For most of the other riders, not so much. For these reasons, I find the tag features to be pretty boring despite it adding variety to the game. Now you've also noticed that the health bar has changed. Instead of the 3 colored health bars, it's closer to the Dragon Knight game where there's only 1 health bar. But there's also a red health bar underneath the green health bar. This is akin to the Marvel vs. Capcom series as well as Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, where you have a chance at recovering your health. If you lost your green health but you have plenty of red health, then you have a chance at recovering, so long as you don't get hit again. But of course, if you lost both your green and red health, then you're screwed. I'm sorry. Better luck next round. Honestly, I'm okay with this change. At least it's better than the Dragon Knight health bar, where it was only generic single health bar and nothing else. This game also has this barrier blast where if your opponent comes at you and you press L and R at the right time, you'll unleash some kind of barrier that pushes him or her away. I've only done this a few times though. You gotta be really good with your timing to do this. But a more noteworthy gameplay feature is the improved climax time. In Final Reflect Chance, instead of the button mashing test of strength part, you now have this quick time event minigame where you have to press a button on the D-pad at the right time. This is another big improvement because with button mashing, the fastest button masher always wins. This made those Final Reflect Chance segments very unfair. With this new feature, it gives both players an equal opportunity at success. And it works, because there were times where I got lucky and other times I was not so lucky. This happens less often now if you're fighting against the CPU though, so you might need to perform your finisher the old-fashioned way at times by making sure your opponent is in picture-perfect position and open for an attack. So with the updated health bar, you're probably wondering, how does climax time get triggered now? Well, it happens when you or your opponent have about 25 to 30% green health left, or less. Looking at the health bar, you can take a wild guess at when it happens, but it'll happen sooner than you think. Other than those changes, there's really not much else to talk about in terms of gameplay. It's essentially a more polished Climax Heroes O's. The roster is even more massive than last time. You have the aforementioned Showa Riders and Shadow Moon, all of the returning characters from Climax Heroes O's, except Autobahn and Cyclone Axle Extreme, and a few new riders, bringing it up to a grand total of 47 characters. 33 default and 14 unlockable characters. Wow, that is huge. But in actuality, there are 49 characters. You're probably asking, where are the other two? I don't see them. More on that a bit later. Before I talk about the new Heisei riders in the game, some of the returning riders have updated movesets and forms. Didn't like how some of the secondary riders in the previous games had no finishers whatsoever? Well, I've got some great news. They finally have finishers now. That means everybody has a finisher, including G3X, Kaiza, Garen, Gasak, Punch and Kick Hopper, and Negadeno. This makes those guys a little more enjoyable to play as now. Zeronis' alternate forms have been tweaked when selecting power up now. Both his Vega and Zero forms can now be changed during a fight, but he'll still do his finisher in Zero form. I guess the developers couldn't come up with a finisher for Zeronis' Vega form. To switch to either his Zero or Vega form, move the left stick left to turn into Zero, move the left stick right to turn into Vega. I wonder why they couldn't do this with Black-RX though. Plus, Negadeno now uses his Negadenliner as a striker, so he's listed as support attack now. Also, for riders that don't have alternate forms or strikers, they get an ability where they get this sort of power boost, in which you activate by moving the left analog stick in any direction. These riders are listed as assault instead of single, which means Double Fang Joker is also like this. The only time you can't use this power boost with these riders are, of course, during tag teams. Some Assault Riders even get some of their moves updated while in this state, like G3X for example. He fires missiles with his GX-05 Kerberos instead of using it as a Gatling gun. This power boost is also added to the Showa Riders, except for V3 and Black-RX, which have strikers and alternate forms respectively. Kamen Rider O's gets new options when selecting him outside of tag team, meaning he has new core medals and combo forms. Since the Kamen Rider O's series completed its run, he has all of his remaining alternate forms from the show, Shouta combo, Brakawani combo, and the awesome Tajador and Putotira combos, the latter being my absolute favorite form of his. Man, I especially love using O's in his Putotira combo form, because his finisher with his blasting freezer is so damn cool, especially with Akira Kushida shouting, man, that freaking rules. Anyway, when you select O's and select form change, you're greeted with two more selections. The first one says O's favorite core medals, and the second one says something along the lines of we'll decide or something like that. You can ignore that second one. After that, you can select between 3 of 5 of his core medal sets, Lataratar, Gata Kiriba, Sagozo, Shouta, and the Tajador combos. If you have the Tajador combo in your set, you'll do Tajador's finisher. Otherwise, you'll simply do the default Tatuba combo finisher. To play as Putotira or Brakawani, you have to select Power Up, as they require a fully charged meter to turn into these forms. By the way, if you're wondering if the Brakawani combo has a finisher, unfortunately no. O's only does his normal Tatuba finisher with this combo. That kinda sucks, but at least we got Tajador and Putotira finishers. The new Heisei riders of this game are Kamen Rider Ibuki from Hibiki, Kamen Rider New Deno from Deno, Kamen Rider Birth from O's, and last but not least, the then current Kamen Rider from the then current Kamen Rider series, and one of my personal favorite Heisei riders, Kamen Rider Fourze. Ibuki, New Den-O, and Birth are all assault riders, so I'm not going to go over them much. The only thing I will say about Kamen Rider Ibuki is that he's basically another Pew 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 character like Garen or Zalda. His trumpet sounds cool though. When selecting Fourze, he's very similar to Kamen Rider O's when you select form change. You have switch selection, elect states, fire states, and that last part that I mentioned when I talked about O's form change. You can skip that one as well. For switch selection, you have the option to choose between 4 of 12 of his Astro switches. These are his modules which are used as weapons, shields, and stuff like that. By default, Fourze has his rocket, launcher, drill, and radar modules. To change any of the 4 switches, move the left analog stick left or right to select the switch you want to change, then move up and down to switch the switch. And there you go! You can now use a different weapon. Personally, I like using the chain array module, the chainsaw module, the hopping module, and the scissors module. Now, what about the other 2 form change options, elect states and fire states? Well, they're just like most of the other riders with alternate forms. You simply move the left analog stick in any direction to change form. Since this is form change and not power up, you can change it to elect states or fire states anytime you want. Elect states is okay, but fire states is a lot of fun to play as. I can see why the CPU always picks that form when you fight against Fourze in arcade mode. Neither elect state or fire state have their own finishers though. Fourze always does his finisher in his base state, and that's perfectly fine. His finisher is awesome, especially the way he uses the rocket module to destroy his opponent, then come down with the parachute module. So that's all of the new characters I've talked about that you see on the character select screen. Now you're wondering, but Allie, you said that there are 49 characters, where are the other 2? Well, that's because you can't simply select them on the character select screen. Character number 48 is Kamen Rider Birth, but then you're gonna tell me, but wait, isn't Birth already there? Aha! I got you there! See, what you don't realize is that there are 2 Kamen Rider Births, and their names are Shintaro Goto and Akira Date. So what's the difference between Goto as Birth and Date as Birth? Well, for starters, they have very different finishers. Goto does his finisher as Kamen Rider Birthday, while Date uses Claw's Sasori to finish off his opponent. Goto and Date also have somewhat different movesets. Now, which one do I think is better in this game? Well, I think they have their pros and cons. Goto has a better finisher, but Date has a better moveset, so I'm kind of split here. So now you're gonna ask me, how the hell do I select Goto or Date if I don't understand Japanese? You know what, just pick anyone. You'll figure it out sooner or later. I know I said I wasn't much of a fan of the tag team feature, but Kamen Rider Birth has 2 tag modes. Tag with any other Kamen Rider or tag with Birth, that being either Goto or Date. No matter which Birth you select, the other one will become Kamen Rider Birth Prototype, aka Kamen Rider Proto Birth. Though I think the only change here is the costume. So if Goto is Proto Birth, he'll have the same moves as he does as Birth. The same thing applies to Date as Proto Birth. And of course they use the same exact tag finisher as every other Kamen Rider in Tag Team. Similarly, Den-O also has his own second tag mode, where you select 2 different forms of Den-O as separate characters. The last character you play as is... well, I'll talk about him later on in this part of the retrospective, but first, I'm going to talk about the modes in this game. The game's story mode is called Heroes Mode, and really, it's just a more straightforward version of Ragnarok mode from Climax Heroes O's. Instead of having a board game, you just get a handful of missions to complete for each character. Some have like 5 or 6 missions, others have like 1 or 2 missions. Fortunately, unlocking everybody is a piece of cake and far less tedious this time around. All you have to do is beat every single mission with every single character. The characters unlock as you keep progressing, so by the time you've beaten all of the missions with the 33 default characters, you'll have most of the characters unlocked. And if there are more to unlock, just beat the missions with the unlocked characters. Some riders in Heroes Mode have cutscenes with actual dialogue in the game, instead of just text where they're just standing there. Namely with O's, Birth, and Fourze. The only other notable change in this mode compared to Ragnarok mode is the addition of tag teams and some missions. There are also some new areas to fight in, like a laboratory, which looks really cool by the way. And of course there are new enemy grunts or foot soldiers. But yeah, this is essentially Ragnarok mode 2.0. Nothing to get excited about here. I'm just glad it's a lot easier to unlock everybody here. All the other modes are the same as the ones in Climax Heroes O, so not much to talk about here. For arcade mode, they added tag teams. So instead of a handful of one-on-one matches, you fight a handful of matches that are either one-on-one, two-on-two, or if you're playing as a tag team, two-on-one and two-on-two. The final boss in Climax Heroes Fourze's arcade mode is either Fourze and O's, Punch Hopper and Kick Hopper, Shadow Moon and Black, or Fourze alone. That is, after you've beaten arcade mode multiple times. If you play arcade mode the first time, the final boss is a Frankenstein version of O's where he has purple eyes and uses Puto Sira's blasting freezer. This form of his was also in the show. But you fight him once and only once. After that, you never face him again in arcade mode. Fortunately, Purple Eyes O's is a playable character, and that's the 49th character in the game. To select Purple Eye O's, highlight O's, hold start, and press A or circle. There are two things you should know about Purple Eye O's though. First off, you can't play as him in tag teams. Second, his finisher is exactly the same as O's normal Tatsuba finisher. The only difference is that his eyes are colored differently here, and he makes a growl at the end. Also, he has a power boost like the Assault Riders. There's really nothing else new in this game. Pretty much everything else is exactly the same as it was in Climax Heroes O's. The graphics, the core gameplay, even the finishers for most of the returning riders are the same as in Climax Heroes O's, with some of them even using finishers going as far back as the original Climax Heroes on the PS2. Yeah, I think you're starting to notice a pattern here. While this game is objectively better than all of the previous Climax Heroes installments, really it's the same damn game 4 times in a row, 5 if you count the Dragon Knight game. As someone who started playing this series since the original on the PS2, Climax Heroes was starting to get stale at this point. The spark that this series had before was starting to wane. I mean, if you take footage of Climax Heroes Fourze and Climax Heroes O's, and you play as the same characters that were in the last game, while also fighting in a stage that was in the last game, the average Joe won't tell the difference. They'll be like Pam in The Office and go, it's the same picture. They even brought back the Kamen Rider Club parody end credits for this game, only now it's an interactive minigame. Although they did something pretty clever here. If you beat arcade mode with a Showa Rider, you play as Kamen Rider Ichigo. If you beat it as a Heisei Rider, you play as Fourze. And all you do is button mash just like in the actual Kamen Rider Club game. And yes, Survive Form Ryuki and Knight's finishers are still censored, as well as Burning Form Agito's finisher. And something I forgot to mention in the Climax Heroes O's part, Odin's final event was also censored. What the f- Honestly, if it wasn't for the inclusion of the Showa Riders, I would have skipped this installment entirely back in the day. And while I've grown to appreciate it just a little more than I did back then, mostly because I enjoyed playing as O's and Fourze as well as the Showa Riders, part of me also feels that it's getting tiresome. You get what I'm saying? It's especially annoying when you keep hearing the same music and see the same stages and areas from all of the previous games. That being said, Climax Heroes Fourze does have a new stage, and that's the Rooftop Helipad stage. It has both day and night versions. This is easily my favorite stage in the Climax Heroes series. I love the view of the bridge, and it looks even more beautiful at night. As I mentioned in the Climax Heroes O's part of the retrospective, instrumental remakes of the Riders theme songs trigger when climax time happens. With the introduction of the Showa Riders and Fourze, naturally they would also get their theme songs. But they aren't the only ones to get new songs. Fourze, Kaiza, Blade, and Garen also get their songs updated. Instead of just the Fourze and Elements, they've been replaced with People with No Name and Kakuze respectively. Although personally I would have gone with Shinichi Ishihara's Dead or Alive for Fourze and Kaiza. Kakuze is perfect though. Fourze also has a second theme for climax time, and that's the intro to the game called Endless Play. This is also an insert song in the Kamen Rider Fourze series. This is the actual song, by the way, not an instrumental remake like all the other Kamen Rider theme songs in the game. Now, Endless Play is an awesome song, but sadly I can't play it. YouTube's copyright policies are way too strict now. All in all, Kamen Rider Climax Heroes Fourze is a solid fighting game for Kamen Rider fans, and definitely the best Climax Heroes game up to this point, and it's especially great for Showa Rider fans. But it's still the same game as the last one, just with more content, and it doesn't feel like a massive overhaul like last time. If anything, it feels like an expansion pack of the last game. This would also be the last Kamen Rider game in the traditional 3D fighting style. As the popularity of traditional 3D fighters started to decline in the 2010s, all of the subsequent Kamen Rider fighting games would go in a different direction from this style. With that being said, we come to the final installment in the Kamen Rider Climax Heroes series, but not the final game in this retrospective, as there are 2 more coming up. This is Kamen Rider Super Climax Heroes, released in 2012 also for the Wii and PSP. This would also be the very last Kamen Rider game released for those platforms. I'll admit, when this game was announced back in 2012, I was like, oh god, another Climax Heroes game? What is this, Japan's version of Madden or NBA 2K? In hindsight, that was very harsh and rather stupid of me to call Climax Heroes that. Those games are far worse. But you gotta understand that I was following the series as they were coming out. I ended up skipping this one because I was fatigued by that point. Then years later, I tried it and it was actually better than I expected it would be. I mean, yeah, it does rehash a lot of stuff from the previous installments, but there are significant changes, mainly the core gameplay. Although it's not as huge as going from Climax Heroes W's to Climax Heroes O's. At first glance, you can't tell the difference between this and Climax Heroes O's and Fourze, but then you see this. Notice anything different? Yeah, you can now run around freely during the fight. This is a huge change from all the previous installments. This essentially turns the game from a traditional 3D fighting game to an arena fighter, but it's not like most of the arena fighters you see today. Think Power Stone but without jumping on higher sections and power-ups to collect, and also without the dynamic stages if you're comparing to Power Stone 2 specifically. So it's just a stage that you run around freely. This is good for avoiding any attacks from your opponent, so you don't really need to sidestep or roll like the previous games, although you can still do that in this game and it still helps you if you want to move out of the way a lot quicker. Projectiles are now easier to avoid because of this, so the pew pew shooty shooty guys can't defeat their opponents so easily. So with the new free mode this game has, naturally the controls have to be updated. Previously you could press up on the D-pad to jump and down to charge your meter. Because you now have to use the D-pad to run around, those have been changed. Now you have to press the select button to charge, and R to jump on the Wii version with the classic controller, but triangle to jump on the PSP version. Since there are less buttons on the PSP than on the Wii Classic controller, the controls in this game aren't one-to-one to their respective versions this time around. On the Wii Classic controller, you press the X button to use your finisher, just like all of the previous installments. But on the PSP, instead of triangle, you have to press both square and cross simultaneously. This is likely gonna mess with your muscle memory, but I understand why they did this. I don't like how charging is awkwardly mapped to the select button though. It's especially awkward if you're playing this on the PSP. To sidestep or roll, double tap up or down on the D-pad. A new dash button was also added. You press L while holding a direction on the Wii Classic controller, while on the PSP, it's the R button, also while holding a direction. Fortunately, the other buttons for weak attack, strong attack, and special attack are the same as the previous games, so you should be able to figure those out in no time. Also, you have the option to swap the D-pad and the left analog stick controls, so you can use the left stick for movement and the D-pad for changing forms and summoning strikers if you want to. But for the sake of this retrospective, I'm only going to go with the default controls. In addition to the free mode and dash button, each rider has a unique movement if you press ZL on the Wii Classic controller or L on the PSP. Some riders can either do a special dash, a special jump, a dodge shot, an earthquake, and some can even fly. But, depending on the rider, if you press ZL on the Classic controller or L on the PSP, then A or circle, you'll perform a special technique. This is known as rider arts. Think of it as a secondary finisher. This is an awesome addition to Climax Heroes, and some of these rider arts look even cooler than their actual finishers. It's too bad not all riders can do this. And if you play as Decade after selecting form change, then selecting one of the 9 riders, he'll be able to do the rider arts of those respective riders. The Showa riders don't have any of these moves. Instead, pressing ZL or L on the respective version will activate their henshin belts. Then performing a special attack causes the game to pause and let the narrator speak, which is exactly the same move they had in Climax Heroes Fourze. The only difference is that in that game you press down in A or down in circle. Yeah. And finally, this game introduces air combos. These combos are very tricky to pull off though, at least for me. I tried to do air combos with a few riders, but my thumbs got tired afterwards. You gotta be really skilled to pull these off. Most of the other gameplay related stuff are quality of life improvements and an improved HUD. Like the block bar goes down instead of up this time, and when that runs out, it's covered up with a big red X until it fully recovers. Also, you don't have to fully charge your meter to change into your alternate form if you select power up, use boost if you play as an assault rider, or slow down everything if you play as one of the Kabuto riders, or Fourze in his Axel form. To change into your alternate form for power-up riders, all you need is 3 bars. For the latter two, you only need 2 bars. Finishers of course still require a full charge. There's also improved blocking, improved rider cancel, that's the barrier blast from the last game, and overall, the gameplay just feels a lot better. It may take some getting used to at first, but you're gonna like it if you enjoyed all of the previous Climax Heroes games. Tag team battles are the same as the last time, unfortunately. The teams still only use 1 health bar, and their finishers are still the same double rider kick / punch. I think the only improvement here is that the CPU actually helps you out this time. And of course it has the benefit of the free mode that this game has, but other than those things, nothing has changed for tag teams. Also, you can't do rider arts during tag teams, which really sucks. All the rider arts button does is call your partner to help you. That's whack. Well anyway, I think it's time to move on to the roster. If you thought the roster was massive in Climax Heroes Fourze, your jaw will fall on the floor once you see this. Super Climax Heroes has a grand total of 62 playable characters. That is unbelievable, especially for a Wii and PSP fighting game. This is without a doubt the deepest roster of any Kamen Rider fighting game ever made. With so many characters to choose from, there's bound to be at least one favorite rider here. All of the returning characters for Climax Heroes Fourze are here except for Purple Eyes. A lot of new secondary riders and even some new alternate forms were added as well. The new riders in this game are Kamen Rider Gills from Kamen Rider Agito, Kamen Rider Delta from Kamen Rider Fourze, Kamen Rider Chalice and Liangle from Kamen Rider Blade, Kamen Rider Zanki and Todoroki from Kamen Rider Hibiki, Kamen Rider the Bee, Drake, and Sasword from Kamen Rider Kabuto, Kamen Rider Saga from Kamen Rider Kiva, Kamen Rider Skull and Eternal from Kamen Rider Double, Kamen Rider Meteor from Kamen Rider Fourze, and last but not least, the then current Kamen Rider from the then current Kamen Rider series, Kamen Rider Wizard. That's 14 new Kamen Riders introduced to go along with the returning 48. And remember, I'm counting the 2 Kamen Rider Birth as separate characters, otherwise it would be 47 returning riders. So that's 62 playable characters, but that's from what you see on the character select screen and what you know about Kamen Rider Birth. In actuality, there are 63 playable characters because there is one that is really hidden. Perhaps 65 characters if we were to count some of the alternate forms? You know what? We'll just say over 60 characters for now. Anyway, let's go over some of the brand new riders. Gills, Delta, Chalice, Todoroki, Skull, and Eternal are all assault riders, so no alternate forms or strikers from these guys. Although funnily enough, Gills and Chalice do have alternate forms, but only as their finishers. It's like Agito's Burning form and Deno's Denliner form when they do their finishers. Also, Eternal sort of has an alternate form when you move the analog stick to boost his power, but all he does is take off his cape. By the way, his glow is green instead of fiery like the other assault riders, which is a nice touch to him. All of the new Kabuto riders are essentially the same as the other returning Kabuto riders as they all use clock up. However, the Bee has both support attack and speed up options, meaning you can use him to either summon his striker or slow down everything around him. When selecting support attack, the Bee uses his Zek Troopers as his strikers. Interestingly, this option also has clock up. You just have to press down and A or down and circle instead of moving a direction on the left stick. He's kind of like Kamen Rider Decade when you select form change, as you summon his strikers by pressing down and A or down and circle. So what's the point of the other one? Well, there is one other difference between the two, the finisher. For support attack, the Bee uses his Zek Troops to help him defeat his opponent. For speed up, he still uses his Zek Troops, but then he's like, nah, I'm doing this all by myself. That's really cool and faithful to how he's portrayed in the Kamen Rider Kabuto series. Also, is it me or do they sound different when they talk? Liangle, Zanki, and Saga are support attack riders, so they use strikers. Liangle summons the elephant undead to come crashing down, Zanki uses his disc animals, and Saga summons the Mother Sagark UFO to attack with a beam. Then there's Kamen Rider Meteor, the only one of the new secondary riders that has a playable alternate form, as he's a power-up rider. He can change into his Meteor Storm form. Also, in his normal form, I like how he uses Saturn Sorcery, Jupiter Hammer, and Mars Breaker as his special attacks. Then for his rider arts, he turns into his flying flaming ball that goes around like crazy. And then of course there's the star of this game, Kamen Rider Wizard. Other than tag, he has 3 options, form change, power up, and assault. For form change, he can turn into his 3 other styles as well as his default flame style. To change into the hurricane style, move the left stick left. For the water style, move the left stick down. For For the land style, move the left stick right, and to turn back into the flame style, move the left stick up. He's like Kamen Rider Kuga's and Deno's alternate forms when you select form change. For power up, he cannot turn into those styles. Instead, after filling up the meter with at least 3 bars, he can turn into the awesome Kamen Rider Wizard Flame Dragon style. Sadly, he doesn't have a finisher in this form, as he only uses his normal finisher, but he does have a Rider Arts in this form, and it is awesome. For Assault, Wizard only fights in his default Flame style, but in this form, he has a Rider Arts that he doesn't have at all when you select the other 2 and tag. Wizard in all 3 of these has the same exact finisher. Among all of the newest Riders in this game, Gills, Zanki, Todoroki, Sasword, and Eternal are my absolute favorites. I've always wanted to play as Gil since the series started. He hasn't been a playable character since the Kamen Rider Agito fighting game on the original PlayStation, so it was great to play as him in this gameplay style. His moveset makes him so fun to play as despite only being an Assault Rider, and really, he's just so damn cool in this game. I especially love the way he opens his mouth just like in the show. Zanki and Todoroki simply rock, no pun intended. I love how they use their own Gekigen guitars, especially as a special attack, but between the two, I think I like Todoroki more. Maybe because he also uses his Lightning Strike fist as a special attack. Sasword is also really fun to play as. His sword attacks are very effective, and he's also one of the few riders with air combos that are easier to pull off. Eternal is also very powerful, especially when he slashes. And his finisher? Simply amazing. Just look at it, it's just so damn cool. Also, Skull has his cool Rider Arts where he dodge shoots his opponent, then he turns around and tips his fedora like a total badass that he is. And his finisher is crazy too, like you can hear the bones crunching after he grabs his opponent. Damn. For the majority of the returning riders, apart from getting the new Rider Arts, they remain mostly unchanged from Climax Heroes Fourze and even Climax Heroes O's. Though a couple of riders do get some new forms. Kamen Rider Double appears to be the same as he was since Climax Heroes O's and Fourze, but when you select Assault, you'll notice 2 arrows on the sides when you see Fang Joker. Press right on the D-pad and you'll notice there is a new form, or new character rather? It's Kamen Rider Joker as well as Kamen Rider Joker with Cyclone. Being that Kamen Rider Joker is Shotaro by himself and not with Philip, does that count as a new character or a new alternate form? Well, whatever he is, I'm glad he was added to the game. It's about time we get to play as standalone Kamen Rider Joker. Like Fang Joker, Kamen Rider Joker is an Assault Rider. But what's the difference between Joker and Joker with Cyclone? Well, really, the only difference is that Joker with Cyclone has a Rider Arts where he gets Cyclone or Philip to help him out. Kamen Rider Joker alone has no Rider Arts whatsoever. The only other rider that has gotten major changes is Kamen Rider Fourze. Form change remains exactly the same as it was in Climax Heroes Fourze, but he gets 2 new options, Power Up and Support Attack. In Power Up, he can turn into the amazing Kamen Rider Fourze Cosmic States, and he is incredibly powerful. He has an awesome Rider Arts where he slices with his Barizon sword, and when he finishes his opponent, he sends them into outer space. For support attack, you'll notice Power Dizer there, but there's much more to this than simply summoning Power Dizer as a striker. Once you start the game, you'll notice that Fourze is in his magnet states. He feels a little clunky to move in this form, but he is great and has a solid moveset. Oh yeah, Ryuga's admin card announcer has been updated as well. The announcer's voice is now accurate to the show. Now about that really hidden character, well, to get him, you need Kamen Rider Meteor unlocked as a prerequisite. Then, in the character selection screen in any mode, select Fourze, then select Tag, then select his default base state, then highlight Meteor, hold start, select Meteor, and then... Yup, that's right, you play as Kamen Rider Fourze in his Meteor Fusion states. And yes, he is just as fun to play as Kamen Rider Fourze's Cosmic States. Although I personally prefer Cosmic States' finisher a little bit more, since Fusion States doesn't send his opponents to space, but that's okay. Now there's one other character in this game. So you select Kamen Rider Wizard, then select Tag, then you decide which form you want to play as, and then... Hey, wait a minute! Kamen Rider Wizard Hurricane Dragon style? I didn't even know he could turn into that form in this game. Is this form of his only playable during tag teams? Why? That makes no sense to me. And he just so happens to be the easiest guy to pull off combos. While the roster is massive and I'm happy with the additional riders, I'm also disappointed that we didn't get the other missing Showa riders for this installment. I thought they'd do that here, but they didn't. This was a huge missed opportunity. Anyway, I think I rambled a little too much about the characters. I think you get what I'm saying about the new characters and new forms for some of the returning ones. Now, of course, you don't have all of the characters and forms out of the gate. Obviously, you have to unlock everybody. Fortunately, like Heroes Mode and Climax Heroes Fourze, unlocking everybody is very easy, although it's also very long. The game's main story mode is called Super Heroes Mode. The difference between this mode and the mode from the last game is that you beat missions based on the stages instead of the riders. But now the missions keep getting unlocked every time you complete a mission or two in each stage. And the missions keep going and going and going and going and going and going like an Energizer battery until you finally clear every single mission. And if you've done that, you've finally unlocked everything. By the way, speaking of the stages, they actually added 3 new stages instead of 1 like they've done since Climax Heroes O's. There's a park stage, a town square stage, and a stage that looks like an abandoned or destroyed building. Though you've probably noticed this already in the footage early on, but nonetheless, it's great to see some more different scenes here instead of mostly the same ones over and over again. Though you're still gonna see the old stages that were around since the original game on the PS2. The majority of missions force you to play as a specific character, but there are other missions that allow you to play as the character that you want. I like Superheroes mode, but it feels like it goes on forever. I keep playing this and go, oh god, when will this end? I do like how you have the option to select the stage with the D-pad, or move the cursor around with the left analog stick and use it as a mouse. I thought it would also work with the sensor bar if you're playing with the Wiimote or Nunchuck, but sadly that's not the case. You still have to use the analog stick or the D-pad. Also, I love the chibi Kamen Riders that jump around when you unlock something. They look so cute. Look at them, they're just so cute. Aww. Now you might notice the 3 options on the top right and go, what the hell do all of these mean? Well, they're pretty self-explanatory actually. The first one is called Heroes Board, and it has all of the Kamen Riders that you've unlocked. Here, you raise the stats of each rider by spending your rider points. With over 60 riders to play as, you're gonna be here for a long time if you want to raise all of the stats. Hey, wait a minute. There's 2 Kamen Rider the Bees listed. In parentheses, they're listed as So Yaguruma and Shin Kageyama, who are actually the 2 notable characters in the Kamen Rider Kabuto series that would later become Kick Hopper and Punch Hopper respectively. Well, that explains everything. But I wonder why they aren't listed as their names in the character select screen like how Kamen Rider Birth is. So I'm guessing support attack is Yaguruma while speed up is Kageyama? Anyway, the next option is called Collection. Basically, this game takes a page out of Super Smash Bros. By introducing its own trophies. You unlock all of these the same way you unlock every rider and form, by beating every single mission. Easy peasy. And last but not least, Password. Here, you enter passwords to unlock extra missions. You can find the correct passwords at GameFAQs.com, just like with the cheat codes in the early Climax Heroes games. By the way, whatever happens to the third-person beat-em-up segments that were in the last 2 games, and the Dragon Knight game for the Wii? They completely disappeared. No wonder why this story mode felt repetitive and long. Every mission is one-on-one and tag team battle. I mean, to be fair, those third-person beat-em-up stages were also repetitive, but at least they added some variety. The other modes are exactly the same as the ones in the last 2. Arcade mode, versus CPU, versus 2P, training, gallery, and options. You know exactly what these are, I don't need to explain them. I like the somewhat updated presentation of this game to make it go along with the theme of the show. Also, I love how they updated the character selection screen with a cool rotating menu. Compared to the character selection screen in the previous games, they were very creative this time around. The graphics are the same as they were since Climax Heroes O's, and once again they recycle stuff from the previous games. I'm not going to show any comparison clips this time around because you already know at this point. But being that this is a game from December 2012, these graphics were starting to look dated by then, especially since consumers were largely moving on from the Wii in favor of more powerful consoles. Good thing this ended up being the last game in the series. The game's soundtrack adds some cool new songs, but a lot of the music is still recycled stuff from all of the previous games. Kamen Rider Wizard has both the instrumental remake of his theme song and the game's opening theme, Perfect Game, which is also a licensed song like Endless Play in the last one. This is also why Endless Play is not featured in this game, hence why Fourze only used the instrumental remake of his theme song. I wonder what the end credits look like. Wait, again? Alright, look. The Kamen Rider Club parody end credits was funny the first time around, but 3 times in a row? Come on, you gotta be more creative than that. Well anyway, that wraps up Kamen Rider Super Climax Heroes and in turn the Kamen Rider Climax Heroes series. Bandai Namco and 80 would go on to work on the Kamen Rider Battle Ride War trilogy for the next few years. To sum it all up, this is a series of solid Kamen Rider fighting games that fans will enjoy, and with more Kamen Riders getting added with each installment, fans will have lots of fun choosing which rider to play as and which rider to fight against. However, with 5 or 6 games in this series in the span of 3 years, there was very little development in each one of them. I think they focused a lot on adding new characters and didn't improve on much else. As a result, it felt like they were rehashing this game every single year. I know this isn't the only fighting game series that does this, but the rehashes feel so blatantly obvious that you might end up getting tired of it after a while. Now with all that being said, Super Climax Heroes as the final installment is a great culmination of everything that the series brought, and it's a lot of fun as well. It's certainly not perfect and it also suffers from rehash syndrome, but it's easily the best of the rehashes and it's one of the best licensed fighting games you can find out there, especially with that deep roster and solid gameplay. I'm glad that they decided to end the Kamen Rider Climax Heroes series on a relatively high note. Making it go on longer would have been too much, and I think even the developers themselves realized it, that keeping the series going would cause fatigue. If you never played any of the Kamen Rider Climax Heroes games, I would recommend picking one and only one. And if there was one I would choose as the only one to play, it would definitely be this one. You don't have to play every single one of them. In fact, you shouldn't do that, otherwise you'll get tired of it like I did. I think it's safe to say that Kamen Rider Super Climax Heroes is the definitive Kamen Rider fighting game. I even think this is better than the later 2 games that I'm about to talk about in this retrospective. It's too bad none of the Wii installments, including this one, had online multiplayer support via Nintendo Wi-Fi connection. But then again, considering how bad the online was for most fighting games on the console at the time, not having online was probably for the best. Now before I move on to the penultimate part of the retrospective, I want to briefly talk about the PSP versions of Climax Heroes O's, Fourze, and Super. You can expect these versions to be pretty much the same as their Wii counterparts, but the obvious takeaways here is that they're all graphically scaled down, the resolution is much lower, and it runs at 30 frames per second instead of 60 frames per second. Also, they feel a little bit slower than I remember playing them. In Ragnarok and Heroes modes for O's and Fourze, the field is much smaller and you don't run around a large area to destroy monsters. Instead, all the monsters pop up and you can pretty much defeat them in a shorter time. So yeah, these ports feel pretty watered down. Now with all that being said, playing a Kamen Rider Climax Heroes game on the go, and one that felt very close to the console counterpart, was something special at the time. You have to understand that the PSP is a 2004 handheld, and for a handheld that old that played games from 2010 to 2012, that's pretty impressive. I never had a PSP until December 2010, and getting Climax Heroes O's was the main reason I got it. I ended up getting both the Wii version and PSP version that year, and I can tell you that I definitely had the time of my life playing this game outside. What's also really cool about the PSP version is the ability to load custom MP3s, so you don't have to hear the same music over and over again. You can use the actual licensed Kamen Rider songs if you want, or you can go nuts and play a licensed American music like, I don't know, Paula Abdul or Alanis Morissette. It's all up to you. By the way, if you want to know how these games look when emulating them, here you go. As you can see, the character models and environments are much higher res, but the HUD of the menu screen still look pixelated as all hell. This is why I emulated them at 1x resolution, to make them look closer to the original PSP hardware. And so, we move forward in time 5 years into the 8th generation of consoles with the first of 2 games of a short-lived revival. This is Kamen Rider Climax Fighters, released in 2017 exclusively for the PlayStation 4. This would also be the last Kamen Rider game developed by Aiding. Now right off the bat on the main menu, you'll notice something different right away. And if you guessed correctly, yes, all of the text is in English. For the first time ever, excluding the Dragon Knight game on the Wii, a Kamen Rider fighting game has been released in English. But then you're gonna ask, hey wait a minute, this game never got released in the US or any Western market. How is this possible? Well, you see, in addition to Japan, the game also got released in some Asian markets like Hong Kong and Singapore, hence why I bought an English copy online. So no more language barrier from this point forward. Of course, you can buy the original Japanese version if you want to, but this is highly recommended if you want something that's easier to understand. Man, it certainly is a breath of fresh air to look at something completely different for once. This is a brand new Kamen Rider fighting game from the stuff that you're used to. However, even though I'm glad they're trying something different this time, after playing this game extensively, I can honestly say that it's really not that great. I'll explain why I'm disappointed in a bit, but for now, let's talk about the gameplay and control since this is all new. Kamen Rider Climax Fighters is a 3D arena fighter, but unlike Super Climax Heroes, this game is a full-blown modern arena fighter, third person and everything. There's even higher places to jump on in the stages, and you can even hide from behind certain areas. This game also puts a big emphasis on 4-player battles, whether it's team-based or all of the riders going against each other. I like doing these 4-way battles, it makes the game look more chaotic. But of course it's all up to you. You can even do 3-way, 2-on-1, 3-on-1, or just a good old-fashioned 1-on-1 battle if you want to. There are no rounds in this game, instead you have lives like in Super Smash Bros. In this game you can go from 1 life all the way up to 99 lives. That is insane. But even though the controls are all new, they're very simple and the game is easy to pick up and play. I'd even go as far as to say they're simpler here than in the Climax Heroes series. Unlike Climax Heroes, you have 2 types of attacks instead of 3. Your normal attacks and your Rider Arts, which are your special attacks. The Rider Arts in this game are not like the ones in Super Climax Heroes, and quite frankly, they're not as cool. Anyway, to do a normal attack, press the square button. For Rider Arts, press the triangle button. You can even do other types of Rider Arts while holding a direction on the D-pad or left analog stick and pressing triangle in the air, or pressing triangle in the air while holding a direction on the D-pad or left analog stick. The same goes for your normal attacks. By the way, you can perform air combos a lot easier here than in Super Climax Heroes. In fact, you'll notice a lot of aerial attacks in the footage you see here. To change the target of your opponent in multi-man and tag battles, press the circle button. To jump, press the cross or X button. This is very useful for jumping on higher spots as well as doing air combos. To block, press and hold the L1 button. When you block, you're surrounded by a barrier that changes color every time your opponent attacks you. It's kind of like the bubble shield in Super Smash Bros. Finally, to dash, press and hold the R1 button while holding a direction on the D-pad or left stick. And that's the controls for basic moves, but there are 2 special abilities that you can use. Now looking at the stats of your character on the bottom left, you'll notice there's a skill meter and an evolution meter as well as your health bar. A skill is a special move or ability that a rider has. It can be used to change into an alternate form, boost your power, or perform a special move that you normally can't do with square or triangle. Normally these can be activated by pressing the R3 button on the right analog stick, but depending on the rider, not all skills work like this. For example, with Kamen Rider Kuga, if you lose all your health while playing as him, you'll recover and turn into his Rising Mighty form. You don't need to press R3 in this case. Some riders can change into their alternate form for a certain amount of time until their skill meter runs out, but some can stay permanently in their alternate form until you refill the skill meter and press R3 again. The best examples I can think of are Kamen Rider Decade and Kamen Rider Double. For Decade, he can turn into any of the previous Phase 1 Heisei riders and stay that way until you refill the skill and turn back into Decade's default form. Same goes for Double when he turns into Fang Joker, then turns back into Cyclone Joker. And some riders can turn into their alternate forms for a brief second just to perform a move, then turn back into their normal form when they're done. Then you have to refill their skill meter again if you want to do that move again. This also applies when doing Rider Arts moves, except for that, you obviously don't have to refill any meter. Examples of this include Kamen Rider Kuga with his Dragon, Pegasus, and Titan forms, Agito with his Trinity form, Deno with his Axe, Rod, and Gun forms, Double with his many Gaia Memory forms, Oz with his many Core Metal forms, Fourze with his Elect States and Fire States, and Wizard in his many styles. You can't change into these forms the same way you used to in Climax Heroes. And then there is your evolution meter. Imagine Power Up and Assault from Climax Heroes combined together, and all of the riders in this game have this. That's basically what it is. Once your evolution meter is full, you either unlock your rider's final alternative form, or simply power up your rider. Like with skills, not all riders have alternate forms when activating evolution. To activate your evolution, press the touchpad on the DualShock 4 controller, or DualSense if you're playing this on a PS5. I'm not sure how this game works with a third-party controller that doesn't have a touchpad. Sorry to those who use those kind of controllers. But if you press the touchpad again while in your evolution state, you will perform your Super Rider arts. This is essentially your finisher, but it doesn't work exactly the same way as the Climax Heroes finishers did. See, for some riders, they might perform a finishing move that requires the opponent to be just in the right position so that your rider can successfully attack them. So like, if your finisher is a Super Rider kick or something, you jump, perform the move, and your opponent is in way off position, you're gonna miss, even if you're locked on target. This is my main issue with the Climax Fighters gameplay. Whereas with the Climax Heroes series sans Dragon Knight, you press a button to attack your opponent, then successfully do your finisher. And if you miss, you could charge up your meter and try again to successfully perform your finisher. And that's another thing I don't like about this game. You can't charge your skill or evolution meter, so you gotta fill them up the old-fashioned way by beating up your opponent. Fortunately, with the live system replacing rounds, the fight continues on until there's a winner, so you should fill up both meters in no time. But even then, I still prefer the old gameplay style, specifically Super Climax Heroes. Honestly, I find the old Climax Heroes gameplay style in general much more enjoyable than this. I don't know, but something about this game just doesn't feel quite right. Don't get me wrong, the controls are responsive and the game is playable, but the new gameplay style? It just isn't clicking with me. Also, the camera can get very annoying at times. Yeah, the Climax Heroes series were rehashes every single year with an updated roster, and maybe updated gameplay in a couple of installments, but those games felt snappier. That's the best way I can describe them. Everything just feels a little off to me. Maybe that's how arena fighters are supposed to be, but I played J-Star's Victory vs. Plus, and I enjoyed that game more than this. And that game wasn't that great either. Also, the Super Rider art finishers just don't look as cool or spectacular as Climax Heroes' finishers. In those games, they had whole-ass cutscenes for finishers. Here, the game temporarily freezes while your rider takes up the whole screen for a bit and is about to unleash his move while glowing. I like having 4-player battles though, and that seems to be the only advantage this game has over Climax Heroes, but that's about it. That and the fact that in team battles, every member of the team has their own health bar. Unlike in Climax Heroes Fourze and Super Climax Heroes, where tag teams shared a single health bar. But yeah, that's about it. However, that isn't the main issue I have with Kamen Rider Climax Fighters. The biggest problem this game has is how lackluster and bare bones it is. Let's start off with the roster. Now at this point in this retrospective, you've seen me cover the entire Climax Heroes series. So looking at the roster in the last installments of that, then looking at this, yeah, this is definitely a downgrade. The series went from 14 playable characters to 28 characters to 38 characters to 49 characters to 60 plus characters, and now only 28 characters. A large chunk of the secondary riders and almost every show rider has been completely cut from this game. So you only have 14 returning main Heisei riders, 3 returning secondary riders, 10 new riders, both main and secondary, and only 1 Showa rider, Kamen Rider Black. I guess if you only played the first 2 installments of Climax Heroes and the Dragon Knight game, the roster size doesn't look too bad. But compared to the peak of the series, this is just pitiful, man. But what's even weirder is that this is literally the entire roster, even when you start up the game for the very first time. Yeah, you heard that right. There are literally no unlockable characters whatsoever. What kind of fighting game is this? Who plays a modern fighting game without anybody to unlock? I have no words. I'm sorry, I have no words about this. This is just pathetic. Well anyway, since I'm talking about the roster, I guess I should talk about the riders and their skill and evolution forms. The returning riders for the most part are essentially the same as they were in Climax Heroes. Obviously they play differently and you can't use their alternate forms exactly like you used to, but other than that, they should be familiar to you at this point. Though some returning riders do have some new forms that were never seen in Climax Heroes. As I mentioned before, Kuga changes into his Rising Mighty form automatically after losing all your health. But when you're in this form and you perform one of his rider arts where he changes into his other forms, he'll change into the rising versions of those, and he'll do different, more powerful moves. Kuga's evolution form is his ultimate form. Agito's skill form is his burning form, while his evolution is his shining form. Hey, would you look at that? They finally added a playable burning Agito for once. It took 6 installments in 8 years for them to finally do that. Ryuki summons his Drag Rider as his skill, but in order to control Drag Rider to attack your opponent, press R3, then move the right stick in the direction that your character is facing your opponent. And of course his evolution is his Survive form. Fourze's skill is his Axle form, but unlike in the Climax Heroes games, he doesn't slow down the game, he just runs faster. His evolution is of course his Blaster form. Blade's skill is his Jack form, while his evolution is his King form. Hibiki's skill is his Kunai form, while his evolution is his Arm form. Kabuso's skill is his Clock Up, but unlike Fourze in his Axle form, he actually does slow down the game like in Climax Heroes. His evolution is his Hyper form. Also, when you start a fight as Kabuto, he starts off in his Mask form and he stays that way until you press down and triangle to change it to his default Rider form. You can't go back to his Mask form for the remainder of the fight though, but that's a nice touch that they did. It's also the first time he does that in a console game since the Kamen Rider Kabuto game for the PS2. For Deno's skill, he can turn into his Liner form, but only briefly, as he only does that form to attack his opponents and that's it. Then you have to refill your skill meter to use it again. And of course his evolution is his Super Climax form. For Kiva's skill, he turns into the various arm monster forms to do a special attack, which he also does as his Rider arts. This is something that he never did in Climax Heroes. His evolution is, of course, his Emperor form. Deke's skill is him changing into any of the Heisei Riders before him, as I mentioned earlier, while his evolution is his complete form. Also, in his evolution finisher, Dien pops up to help him out. This is the only NPC rider in this game. And when he does the different rider arts in this form, he'll summon the rider forms that you selected in their alternate forms, which is really cool. Plus, Deke can turn invisible, an ability he never had in Climax Heroes. This is very useful if you don't want any opponents to target you. For Double, his evolution is his Cyclone Joker Extreme form. However, after changing into Fang Joker with his skill, his evolution only powers him up. So if you want to change into his Cyclone Joker Extreme form, you have to go back into his Cyclone Joker form after refilling your skill meter, like I mentioned earlier. Axel doesn't have a skill for some reason, but his evolution form is, of course, his Trial form. He runs incredibly fast in this form. O's skill form is his Tajidor combo form, while his evolution form is his Puto Tira combo form. For Bert's skill, he fires his breast cannon, while his evolution form is his birthday form. By the way, if you're wondering which birth this is, it's Akira Date. Yeah, there's only one birth this time around. Fourze's skill is his Magnet States, while his evolution form is his Cosmic States. For Meteor's skill, he unleashes his Blue Meteor, you know, that move in Super Climax Heroes where he flies around like crazy. And for his evolution, of course, he changes into his Meteor Storm form. Wizard's skill is his All Dragon style, while his evolution form is his Infinity style. And then there's Kamen Rider Black, who has no alternate forms whatsoever for both skill and evolution. Obviously, since he never had those in the shows or movies. Instead, he just powers up when activating his evolution. For his skill though, he used the Satan Saber to attack his opponents, which is very interesting because that's Shadow Moon's weapon. That's all for the returning riders. The new main riders in this game are Kamen Rider Gaim, Kamen Rider Drive, Kamen Rider Ghost, Kamen Rider X8, and the then current Kamen Rider from the then current Kamen Rider series, Kamen Rider Build. The new secondary Heisei riders are Kamen Rider Beast from Kamen Rider Wizard, Kamen Rider Baron from Kamen Rider Gaim, Kamen Rider Mach from Kamen Rider Drive, Kamen Rider Spectre from Kamen Rider Ghost, and Kamen Rider Brave from Kamen Rider X8. Beast skill allows him to recover his health while he changes to his Beast Hyper form for his evolution. Also, he can turn invisible like Decade. Gaim's skill form is his Kachidoki Arms form, while his evolution form is his Kiwami Arms form. Baron's skill form is his Lemon Energy Arms form, while in his evolution form, he transforms into Lord Baron. Drive's skill turns into his Type Formula form, while his evolution turns him into his Type Trideron form, and he fires his Trailer Hole as his finisher. Mach's skill only gives him a speed boost, but he can change it to his Dead Heat Mach form while activating his evolution. For Ghost's skill, he can change it to his Grateful Damashi form, but he only uses it to attack one of his opponents, then immediately reverts back to his default Ore form. For his evolution, he turns into his Mugen Damashi form. For Spectre's skill, he summons his machine hoodie bike to attack his opponent, and for his evolution, he changes to his Deep Spectre form. Xa's skill form is his maximum gamer level 99 form, while his evolution form is his Hyper Muteki gamer form. Brave's skill is his fantasy gamer level 50 form, while his evolution is his legacy gamer level 100 form. And finally, Kamen Rider build has no alternate forms for his skill or evolution. Instead, he has a super hop for his skill and he just powers up for his evolution. Though he does have a number of forms when using rider arts. I guess it makes sense since his series was still airing at the time. Among the new riders in this game, the ones I had the most fun playing as were Beast, Drive, Mach, X8, and Brave. Well, all things considered since I don't like the game all that much, but they were enjoyable to play as nonetheless. By the way, did you know that you can do mirror matches in this game? I'm surprised they did this because you couldn't do that at all in the Climax Heroes series. Also, if you do this, all the riders look exactly the same, which is pretty funny. Well anyway, I think I've rambled enough about the riders in this game. Let's talk about the modes. Honestly, there's not a whole lot of modes. This game has even less modes than in the Climax Heroes series, which makes it even sadder. The game's main story mode is just called Mission. You have these text-based cutscenes with the riders and that's all there really is. And this mode is incredibly short. Although to be fair, the story modes in the Climax Heroes series were kind of like this as well. But this is a PS4 game! I expected something better, especially after they just came out with the Batch Ride War trilogy. Plus the story modes in Climax Heroes O's and Climax Heroes Fourze had third-person beat-em-up segments. And since the entire roster is playable out of the gate, really, what's the point of playing the story mode? The only things you unlock in this game are masks and belts for your avatar, and, of course, PlayStation trophies. And the PlayStation trophies are pathetically easy to unlock. I mean, don't get me wrong, the avatar looks cute and all, but I want something more substantial and more satisfying to unlock. This game has DLC, but the only DLC it has is more masks and belts for your avatar. Yeah, absolutely pathetic. The biggest disappointment I have with this game is the lack of an arcade mode or anything similar to that. After you beat Mission, you're done! You don't have to play this game anymore! There is no replay value whatsoever here. I am not joking. Really, the only way you could play this game again is if you have a friend or two who was a Kamen Rider fan and they want to play with you, as this game has local multiplayer. Well, there is one other mode this game has, and that is online. Yup, that's right. For the first time ever, a Kamen Rider game has online multiplayer. Jeez, what took them so long? This is a long overdue feature. Unfortunately, I didn't record any footage of me playing online because I don't have a PlayStation Plus subscription at the moment. And upon looking at the subscription tiers, I'm sorry, but that is too expensive. I rarely play on my PS4 these days, and I am not gonna pay $10 a month just to play a Kamen Rider fighting game online. And mind you, that's for the most basic tier they have. Sony, are you out of your damn minds? Sorry guys, I'm spoiled with playing online for free on PC. The stages in this game are all new, so nothing from Climax Heroes. There are 6 stages in total, and 2 of them have day and night stages. You have the school facility, building rooftop, pier, both sunset and night, floodway, ruins, both sunset and day, and the special training facility. But even though the stages are new, the floodway in this game looks like the water purification factory stage in Climax Heroes, so that's a nice little thing they did. Also, the building rooftop has a helipad much like the one in Climax Heroes. The music in this game is very forgettable. There's nothing catchy in this game like in the Climax Heroes soundtracks. In fact, a lot of the original songs in this game are rather generic. Fortunately for stages, you can use songs from the Climax Heroes series and even songs from the Batch Ride War trilogy, so it's not all too bad. But I really hate that music after you activate evolution. It's so damn annoying, like like come on already, stop! You're especially gonna hear it a lot if you're playing 4-way and tag team battles. Apparently there's a premium rider sound edition of this game, much like how the Batch Ride War trilogy got premium TV and movie sound editions of those games. But it only got released in Japan. Why wasn't there an English version of this? Man, we were robbed big time. Well, we as in the ones who bought the game in English from Southeast Asia. The graphics look really good. The riders have a lot of detail on their bodies and the environments look really good as well. It's nothing mind-blowing even for PS4 standards, but overall they're nice to look at. This game runs on the Unity engine. A lot of people seem to hate games running on this engine, but visually, I don't think this game looks bad at all. It's everything else that is lackluster. As far as I know, this game has no enhancements on the PS4 Pro, PS5, or PS5 Pro, so you're gonna play the game as it is no matter which hardware you're playing it on. The game runs at a consistent 60 frames per second, although there are noticeable frame rate dips when you do the evolution finisher sometimes. Look, I don't hate the game, I don't think it's a bad game, but after 5 or 6 installments of Climax Heroes games and waiting 5 years for the next game to come out, I'm just so disappointed, especially since this game is in English and not Japanese like the previous games. Gameplay wise, it's fine. The potential is there, but it's not the kind of game that I want to revisit. But the lack of content and relatively small roster especially make this game a hard sell. I'd only recommend this if you're some kind of collector or aficionado. Otherwise, skip this one. Even as a Kamen Rider fan, you're not really missing anything. All in all, Kamen Rider Climax Fighters is a below average fighting game. Well guys, we finally made it. The final part in the Kamen Rider Climax retrospective, the last Kamen Rider fighting game to date, and the last Kamen Rider game of the Heisei era. This is Kamen Rider Climax Scramble, also known as Kamen Rider Climax Scramble Zeo, released in 2018 exclusively for the Nintendo Switch. This game was developed by Landcars, the folks who worked on the Lost Heroes duology for the PSP and Nintendo 3DS. Now, is this game any better than Climax Fighters? Well, we're about to find out. And to the surprise of absolutely no one, this is an updated port of Kamen Rider Climax Fighters. And by updated, I mean in terms of content, although it's not a huge update in this case. Otherwise, it's scaled down compared to its predecessor. Graphically, this game looks more or less the same, but since it's running on weaker hardware, obviously the game is not going to look as good. You may not notice a difference at first, but when you play the Pier stage at night, the difference becomes jarring. You can clearly tell from the footage here that Climax Fighters on the PS4 looks a lot better. Now you're probably going to say, but dude, graphics don't matter, gameplay does. Sure, but when the gameplay in the last game wasn't that great to begin with, it's kind of hard to overlook these things. But the most noticeable difference is the frame rate. The game runs at 30 frames per second instead of 60 like the majority of the games in this series. And it's not even a consistent 30 FPS either. You can see frame rate dips every now and then, and it gets especially bad when you do your finisher. Yikes. This isn't the game's fault though, it's working within the limitation of the Switch hardware. The Nintendo Switch 2 came out recently, and some original Switch games run better on it than the original Switch console. I'm not sure if this is one of them, but if there is any noticeable differences in how this game performs, please let me know. Also, I found a graphical glitch while capturing footage in this game. Look at what I'm doing with Kamen Rider Drive's finisher here. And mind you, this was actually captured on real hardware, no emulation whatsoever. Gameplay and control wise, it's almost one-to-one to Climax Fighters on the PS4, though there are a couple of changes. The evolution meter is now called the Scramble meter, so when you do an evolution burst, it's now called a Scramble blast. And instead of pressing the touchpad on the DualShock 4, you press L and R simultaneously to activate it and press those again to do your finisher. Also, for activating your skill, for some reason it's been mapped to the left stick button instead of the right stick button. This can make changing into different alternate forms feel very awkward, since you also have to hold a direction on the D-pad, like with Decade for example. Everything else is exactly the same. Just swap the buttons on the DualShock 4 controller with the buttons on the Switch Pro controller or the Joy-Cons. You also have the option to play using motion controls with the Joy-Cons, but I know most of you are gonna pick the traditional route, so I won't go over that. Even I don't play fighting games with motion controls anyhow. Also, you can play the overall or side-by-side view instead of the familiar third-person view if you want to, but the field surrounding the invisible wall will be smaller instead of taking up the whole stage. This makes it kinda like Super Climax Heroes, but in this gameplay style, it feels a little disoriented, especially since rider kicks and moves like that don't always connect to an opponent. This game also introduces rider boosts, where you pick up items in the middle of a fight to boost your health, attack, defense, and even your scramble meter. You have the options to turn these off if you want to. And that's basically it for the gameplay changes. Everything else is cosmetic, from a new HUD to a different looking shield when you block an attack. Also, you no longer have a number counter on your health bar, which is fine. I thought the counter was arbitrary. The roster is a little bit better than the last game, but still pales in comparison to Super Climax Heroes and even the 2 games before that one. All 28 riders from the last game are here as well, while adding 4 new playable characters. The new characters are Kamen Rider Cross from Kamen Rider Build, spelled Cross Z, but the Z is silent. Kamen Rider Zio, that's Z-I-O, not Zio like Power Rangers Zio. The then current Kamen Rider from the titular then current Kamen Rider series. Kamen Rider Gaze, the secondary rider from that same series. Kamen Rider Woz, no relation to Scott the Woz, also a secondary rider from that same show. And returning from Kamen Rider Super Climax Heroes is Shadow Moon, who is also the main antagonist in this game's story mode. I guess since Showa Rider fans were so disappointed in the last game, that they decided to throw a bone and add at least one more, even though Shadow Moon is technically not a rider. It also makes sense since he's Kamen Rider Black's arch nemesis. Anyway, Kamen Rider Cross's skill is his charge form, while his Scramble Blast is his magma form. Kamen Rider Zio has no alternate forms for his skill or Scramble Blast, but he does have a few of his rider armors when using his Rider Arts moves, Double, Fourze, and Build. By the way, if you've never seen the Kamen Rider Zio series, he's basically Kamen Rider Decade before the latter half or phase 2 of the Heisei era of Kamen Rider. Makes sense since he's from the 20th installment of that era. Like Zio, Kamen Rider Gaze also only has alternate forms for his rider arts, namely the Fourze rider armor. Kamen Rider Woz has no alternate forms whatsoever, just like he did in the show. Also, I think he was added later in an update, meaning he isn't in the game's cartridge. That could explain why he's called New Character when you select him. That makes me wonder, were they planning on adding other DLC characters at some point, but that ended up never happening? That's a shame. We could have had a special roster here if those plans came to fruition. And then there is Shadow Moon. He's essentially the same as he was in Climax Heroes Fourze and Super Climax Heroes, except, of course, he plays in the Climax Fighter / Scramble gameplay style. Also, he does the Shadow Flash in the game, something he never did in the last 2 games he was in. Almost all of the returning riders play exactly the same as they did in Climax Fighters. However, Kamen Rider Build has new alternate forms for his skill and Scramble Blast. He has 2 skill forms, Rabbit Rabbit and Tank Tank. For Rabbit Rabbit, you simply press the left stick, but for Tank Tank, you need to hold up or down on the D-pad, then press the left stick. And for his Scramble Blast, he turns into the awesome Genius form. Oh yeah, and this game has 2 new stages, Quarry and Abandoned Building, with Quarry getting a day and night version. There's really not much else added to this game. Like with Climax Fighters, this game is extremely bare bones and has a small roster. If you didn't like the last game that much, you're not missing out on much here. Once again, they didn't add an arcade mode, and for some odd reason they took out online multiplayer. I guess since the Switch itself has a terrible online service and is not ideal at all for fighting games, they decided to cut it out. But then that only leaves 2 modes, Story Mode and Free Battle. 3 if you count Tutorial. That is absolutely pathetic, especially for a game released in 2018. How do you release a game in the modern era that has less features than the games made several years prior? That's stupid! Well, even though the game is extremely lackluster, if there's one thing I can give this game props for, it's the story mode. Unlike Climax Fighters, you do have characters to unlock here, so that gives you a very good incentive to play the story mode. But really, besides Shadow Moon and Cross, all of the unlockable riders are the returning ones from Climax Fighters, who are all available out of the gate. But hey, at least they have unlockable characters this time. What the hell were they thinking with Climax Fighters? Anyway, the story mode is centered around Zio and Gaze. Space-time rifts have opened all across the world, and all of the past Kamen Riders show up. But then they start acting strange and want to fight Zio and Gaze. After they fight them, it turns out that their memories were overwritten by a mysterious black and white shadow. It is revealed that Shadow Moon was behind all of it, or so it seems. I like the story mode. There's an actual interesting story this time around. In Climax Fighters, it would just build having a bunch of random conversation with the other riders. God, mission mode in that game was so boring. Now besides the story, this mode essentially works the same way as Mission and Climax Fighters. You have several chapters, each with many episodes. The map is also similar to the one in Mission. But unlike Mission and Climax fighters, you don't just fight other riders. In some missions, you even fight other monsters and grunts. The grunts in this game are the Riot Troopers, Masquerade Dope Pants, Ghouls, Bug Survivorses, Kurokage Troopers, and Kamen Rider Mage. By the way, for some reason the Riot Troopers are called the Lion Troopers in this game. That's obviously a translation error. And after you beat a stage, you can beat that same stage again but in hard or extreme difficulty. So there's actually some replay value here. This mode even supports 2 players, so you can get a friend to join along and play with you. Oh yeah, and you can raise the stats of your riders just like in Superheroes mode in Super Climax Heroes. You do this by spending rider points, which you earn after beating missions. All of the fights in story mode are in the overall view instead of the third person view. You also unlock rider avatars and poses for your profile, but that's really nothing special. This story mode is looking pretty decent so far, right? Well, it only gets better from here. So after Zio and Gaze save all the Kamen Riders and restore their memories, they finally confront Shadow Moon. And when they finally defeat him, it turns out that his memories were overwritten as well. So he's actually not the real villain behind all of this. After the space-time ring gets sucked into the ground, an earthquake happens and the real villain is finally revealed. This is Kamen Rider Core. He was first introduced in Movie War Core from all the way back in 2010, but he has mainly appeared in video games like all Kamen Rider Rider Generation 2 for the Nintendo DS and PSP, and of course this game. Since he's the only boss character in the game, he can seem pretty tough, as he has a much longer health bar broken down into 2. A bit later on, Kamen Rider Core absorbs Kamen Rider Black and becomes Kamen Rider Core Reinforced. The battle may seem a lot tougher and Zio is starting to feel doubt, but then all of the other past Kamen Riders come and lift his spirit, telling him not to give up and believe in himself, because that's what Kamen Riders do. And of course, Kamen Rider Core is defeated, and all of the riders in Shadow Moon return to their normal lives. I'll admit, despite how lackluster this game is overall, it has an awesome story mode, and I really enjoyed it. They really made up for how underwhelming Mission was in Climax Fighters. But that's where my praise ends. The story mode is the only thing that carries this game. If it wasn't for that, this game would have been an easy skip. So all you have to do is just watch a long play of this game's story mode on YouTube, because other than this, you're not missing out at all. The in-game music is okay, but nothing memorable like the music in the Climax Heroes series. The Scramble Blast theme is just as repetitive here as the Evolution Burst in Climax Fighters. Just replace with I mean, it's a little bit better, I guess? And sadly, they removed the Climax Heroes and Battle Ride Wars songs this time around. Also, this game features the opening theme from Kamen Rider Zio, Overcourser, which is an officially licensed song. It plays in the intro and end credits as well as the final battle cutscene with Kamen Rider Core. Between Climax Fighters and Climax Scramble Zio, I'm not sure which is better. Both are average at best fighting games, but Climax Scramble is better for single player, while Climax Fighters is better for multiplayer and smoother gameplay. And of course the latter is graphically better. I guess it all depends on what you're looking for. If you want a good single player story and don't care about anything else, go for this game. If you want a smoother gameplay experience but can deal with a lack of content just to play with friends, then go with Climax Fighters. Either way, none of them are as fun as the Climax Heroes series, especially not the last 3 installments. All in all, Kamen Rider Climax Scramble Zio is okay. At least I got a good amount of enjoyment out of something from this game. Maybe if they made a PS4 version out of this game as well, I might have appreciated it more. It's a shame this ended up being the very last Kamen Rider fighting game, well, for now at least. And it's a shame that the only 2 Kamen Rider fighting games that are both in English and accessible on modern platforms are some of the weakest Kamen Rider games. And that's the Kamen Rider Climax franchise, a series of fighting games featuring various characters from the Kamen Rider TV series from Japan. Starting off as a series of fun games that were rehashes every single year, but kept adding more riders and sometimes even improved the gameplay. Then 5 years later, it would get a short-lived revival that went a different direction and tried to do the same thing in that direction, but it wasn't as good. This is a series of fighting games you're better off just picking and choosing. Otherwise, you're gonna get tired after a good while. And with all that being said, I think we can all agree that Kamen Rider Super Climax Heroes is a clear winner. Or perhaps you may have a personal favorite in this series that isn't Super Climax Heroes. maybe Climax Heroes Fourze or Climax Heroes O's? I'll still recommend playing Super Climax Heroes, but since the vast majority of these games are in Japanese, the language barrier might be a problem for you. I would only recommend playing Kamen Rider Dragon Knight for the Wii, Kamen Rider Climax Fighters, and Kamen Rider Climax Scramble only because they're in English, but keep your expectations low on those. Or maybe you just want to play a Kamen Rider Climax game on a specific platform, like the original Kamen Rider Climax Heroes on the PS2. Regardless though, stick to one and only one, or if you want to play another game in the series, get 2 more and that's it. Anyway, with all that being said, here's how to play the Kamen Rider Climax series in the present day. All of the Climax Heroes games across the PS2, Wii, and PSP are very cheap. You can look at pricecharting.com and see that buying even all of these games in the series won't break your wallet. Even factory sealed copies are relatively cheap. Prices can go between $13 and $55 depending on the condition, which is great. However, do keep in mind that most of these games are from Japan, and both the PS2 and Wii are region locked. Buying a Japanese PS2 or Japanese Wii unfortunately isn't cheap, despite both of them being 20 plus years old now. Prices can go from $30 to over $100 depending on the condition of the console and the necessary stuff it comes with, like AC adapters, video output, and controllers, if it has them at all. You may also need to get an upscaler since a lot of modern TVs only have HDMI input, and that's going to pile up the cost for you. Fortunately though, the PS2 and the Wii can be soft modded, so you can play all of these games on the console of your region. For the PS2, I recommend buying a memory card that has FreeMcBoot pre-installed. You can also soft mod the PS2 yourself, but this is way easier. You can find these cards for cheap on places like eBay. This should allow you to play Japanese PS2 games like Kamen Rider Climax Heroes. For the Wii, by installing the homebrew channel and the necessary apps, you can play Japanese Wii games on your American or European Wii, including the Climax Heroes games that were released on it. I'm not going to show any tutorial on how to do that. You can find plenty of those on YouTube. The homebrew channel also works on the Wii U. But if you're going to do either of these, you can simply forego buying the games and pirate the ROMs and load them instead. And a lot of you may not even have a PS2 or Wii from your region. It would also be expensive like the Japanese counterpart, unless you're lucky and get them at a thrift shop for dirt cheap. Same goes for getting a PSP from any region. Fortunately though, all PSPs and all PSP games are region free, so if you bought a Climax Heroes PSP disc and pop it in, it should play just fine. And if you don't want to spend money on those games, you can use custom firmware and load ROMs so you save money that way. Now if you don't want to go through any of these, the good news is that it's even easier to play these games. You don't even need a console or the physical copies themselves, because there's this wonderful thing called emulation. In case you couldn't tell, all of the footage shown here except for the last 2 games were captured using emulators on my PC. For the original Climax Heroes on the PS2, you can use the PCSX2 emulator for Windows, Mac, and Linux, XBSX2 for the Xbox Series X and S consoles if you have developer mode enabled, and EtherSX2 for Android devices. For Climax Heroes W, Fourze, and Super Climax Heroes, as well as the Dragon Knight game, there's the GameCube and Wii emulator called the Dolphin emulator for Windows, Mac, and Linux, Android devices, and even the Xbox Series S and S in developer mode. And for the PSP versions, there's the PPSSPP emulator, also for all of the aforementioned devices. All of these emulators also have cores on RetroArch. RetroArch is available on a wide variety of operating systems and devices. I'm not going to go into every single one of them. These emulators require a decently powerful computer or mobile device, but nothing too demanding. I'm not going to tell you where exactly to get the ROMs for these, but a simple Google search or a search on the Internet Archive should help you out. Now for Kamen Rider Climax Fighters and Kamen Rider Climax Scramble. Unlike the Climax Heroes series, these are playable on platforms that are still actively supported today. PS4, PS5, Switch, and Switch 2 can all play these games respectively. I know a lot of you have at least one of those consoles. However, copies of Climax Fighters and Climax Scramble are pretty damn expensive. Well, at least the English versions. The original Japanese versions are a little cheaper. Prices for the English versions can go as low as $80, and some copies are sold for over $100. For the amount of content that those games have, that is highway robbery. As for emulators, there are PS4 emulators, but they're still in their early stages. They require a lot more tinkering than the more mature emulators like PCSX2 and Dolphin, and even then, you might run into some problems. Not all games are compatible on PS4 emulators at the moment anyhow, so you're better off playing this on an actual PS4 or PS5, at least for the foreseeable future. Nintendo Switch emulation, on the other hand, works very well with almost every game, including Climax Scramble, but with the controversy surrounding Switch emulation, I'm gonna refrain from talking about it here for now. It's been almost 8 years since Kamen Rider Climax Scramble was released. That's the longest until now that there hasn't been a Kamen Rider fighting game since they started making those with the Kamen Rider Ichigo game for the original PlayStation all the way back in 1998. Will we ever see another Kamen Rider fighting game again? It's a possibility. If Bandai Namco decides to get the ball rolling again, we might get just that. Maybe we'll get a Climax Heroes revival or something totally new. To be fair, there hasn't been many Kamen Rider video games in general since the Reiwa era began, so who knows. Anyway, I think it's time to wrap things up. I'm Allie-RX, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being patient with me after I took such a long time making this. And thank you so very much for watching this very special retrospective. Take care, and I'll see you all in the very near future.